Hello there, and welcome to the planet's memory, where we let curiosity drift slowly, like mist through an ancient valley, and where the science of deep time is allowed to breathe without haste. Tonight, we begin a journey into a question that lingers not in textbooks, but in our own wonder. A question that feels less like fact and more like dream. What if the forests themselves remember? Imagine it for a moment. Every towering tree, every delicate fern, every shifting shadow cast on Jurassic soil holding within it not just carbon, not just minerals, but entire histories, the memory of a world long before us. It may sound like a story meant for poets or myths, but the longer you sit with it, the less impossible it seems. Before we wander deeper, I'd like to invite you into this space with me. Where are you listening from tonight? Is it somewhere quiet, where the rustle of leaves or distant hum of night sounds blends into your thoughts? Or is it a place where silence is harder to find, where you're looking for refuge in the calm of another voice? Wherever you are, pause with me. Breathe in slowly, because what we are about to step into is not just prehistory, but the living memory of this planet. And if you find comfort in these drifting journeys, I'd be grateful if you left a like or subscribed. It helps this little corner of calm reach others who, like you, may need a gentle reminder that not everything has been forgotten. When we imagine the Jurassic, our thoughts often rush to the dinosaurs themselves, the immense sauropods whose necks reached toward cloud-lined canopies, or the great predators who shaped fear into bone. But beyond tooth and claw was a deeper dominion, the forests, endless cathedrals of green, rising in silence, woven in complexity beyond anything human hands have built. Their roots sank into time itself, their leaves filtering the sunlight into layered worlds of air and shadow. If dinosaurs ruled the land, the forests ruled eternity, outlasting the flash of any single life. And here lies the mystery. Could forests remember? Could the stone that forms from roots pressed into soil, or the isotopes embedded in would long transform to mineral, hold some record of feeling, some echo of remembrance? We know scientifically that trees breathe in the sky and anchor the soil. We know that when they fossilize, their cellular patterns preserve chemical signatures, archives of air and atmosphere from ages past. The oxygen we breathe tonight still carries ratios shaped by deep-time forests across epochs. But what if beyond chemistry there is memory? We cannot prove it, yet forests whisper of something wider than knowledge. Their silence has a rhythm, like breath. Not because silence means absence, but because silence means depth. They do not keep time as we do, with hours, with years, with endings. Their time is the slow drifting of climates, the rise and fall of seas, the erosion of mountains ground to dust. Human history feels brief beside such spans, like sparks briefly flaring above the ash of a fire. Picture walking through a Jurassic canopy. The air is damp, tasting faintly of resin and fern. You look upward, but the sky is hidden. The branches bend together into a green labyrinth. Insects pulse in the dappled light. Shadows shift where something massive moves quietly in the distance, but to the trees it is no concern. They have seen creatures come and go. They carried spores and seeds across epochs, long before vertebrates grazed beneath them, long after many of those wanderers fell into extinction. Their patience absorbs everything. Maybe that is what memory feels like to the planet. Not a clear image, not a story told in sequence, but an ongoing patience, a willingness to hold both presence and absence without urgency. The isotopes, the rings, the fossil impressions in buried roots, these are not random. They are traces of continuity. They are keepsakes of a world that refuses to vanish completely, even under the grinding entropy of deep time. And yet, when we lay hands on petrified wood, or cradle a leaf burned into shale, or read the isotopic script of an ancient atmosphere, are we simply studying geology, or are we listening to memory itself? Is it possible the forests remember more clearly than we ever will? Perhaps the act of looking back is itself an act of remembering on the planet's behalf. Perhaps when we lean against stone or walk barefoot through soil, the memory of trees is listening too. Not through eyes, not through thought, but through the continuity of matter itself. And if this much is carried forward in silence, If even forests may gather and release memory across millions of years, then what else could be hidden beneath their roots? What deeper stories of stone, of soil, of forgotten civilizations pressed into the undergrowth? Could what we call fossils be not just remains, but recollections the earth has chosen to keep? And yet, if this much can be remembered, what else might we have already lost? Beneath the vast canopy where sunlight drifts in fragments, there is another cathedral, one that does not sway in the wind, one that does not vanish with seasons. It is the Cathedral of Stone. We rarely imagine it when we think of forests, yet every tree, every fern, every creeping vine anchors itself in this hidden world. Roots do not live in isolation. They are bridges, extending downward into a depth that is part soil, part memory, part unfinished story. To walk through a Jurassic forest is to walk above billions of years layered in silence. Beneath the moss, beneath the fallen needles of conifers and the damp carpets of ferns, lie shifting sediments that tell us not one story but many. A Jurassic root pierces one age but clutches remnants of another that came before. Fragments pressed into shale, worn shells transmuted into stone, carbon signatures written like faint ink across the earth. Life does not grow only upward. It descends, rooting itself into the spent lives of everything that came before. Even now, we can trace this. Paleontologists kneel in riverbanks, cradling rock strata that sandwich together vanished climates. Arid deserts, lush swamps, humid greenhouse worlds. Each layer is not separate, but part of a continuum, as though the earth never forgot to keep a record. And here is the wonder. Roots are not passive. They unlock stone. They break it, pry it open, drink from it, and return something in exchange. Through this endless cycle of touch and exchange, forests shape geology itself. New minerals form where roots push in, while isotopes within buried stone dissolve into their tissues, flowing back into the air by way of a single leaf. In time, the stone consumes the roots, the impression of bark, the pattern of cells, the ghostly memory of watercourses sealed into the fossil record. Who is carrying whom? Does the forest anchor into stone, or is the stone anchoring the forest? What we see in thin sections under microscopes today are not just fragments of rock, but fragments of dialogue, a record of cooperation between root and mineral. And if nature is patient enough to record such slow conversations, perhaps the planet's memory is not stored above ground at all, but in the quiet whispers hidden beneath our feet. Silence drifts heavily under the roots. Unlike the canopy above, which gleams with sounds of insects and birds and wandering giants, the soil listens without interruption. It receives carbon, moisture, decay. It hides fossils within itself like letters never delivered. Deep roots grasp these letters, twining around bone and shell, lodging into compressed layers of sandstone. One might almost imagine they are reading, not in words, but through contact, feeding on the silent abundance of extinct lives. Think of what this means. Each forest is built on forgotten worlds, past ecosystems pressed beneath them. We imagine history as a line, yet here it feels more like a spiral, one age crumbling into soil so another can rise above it. Stone and root are forever in conversation, carrying both death and renewal. And when we walk through forests today, whether among pines or oaks or even beneath the concrete trees of cities, we too are standing on sediment layered with echoes so distant we cannot fully grasp them. The ground remembers what we have forgotten. Isn't that a reminder of how thin our moment really is? The step of a sauropod may be lost, yet the root that burrowed beside it left a trace. Stone preserves those traces. We hold them in our hands, polished or broken, and say they are fossils. But perhaps fossils are less about what is left behind, and more about what is taken forward, into stone, into memory, into the unfolding of everything that will come. And yet, how many conversations between root and stone are gone forever, weathered away before they could be preserved? How many layers of time are erased when mountain chains crumble into rivers, when oceans subduct entire landscapes into their molten depth? If stone itself forgets through erosion, perhaps memory is not stability at all, but a repetition, an echo that appears long enough to remind us, and then disappears again into silence. And so, beneath the green cathedral, the roots keep reaching downward into memory, downward into silence, downward into the fossils of lives that will never rise again. Always searching, always entwined, always whispering. And if this much patience is written beneath us, if this much depth is given to soil and stone, then what secrets might be waiting in the canopy above, where sun and shadow weave a different kind of memory? From the roots that whispered their secrets into stone, we rise slowly upward, following the trunks that stretch like living columns toward a higher world. Here, beyond the damp hush of soil, we enter a realm of air and light, a world suspended above the earth, layered upon itself, tier after tier, until the treetops tower higher than cathedrals. The Jurassic canopy was not one layer but many, each alive with its own quiet pulse, each a stage where sunlight was divided into fragments to be shared and refracted, as though time itself had been sliced by leaves. Standing at the forest floor, this canopy would feel unreachable, a ceiling of green and shadow far above, but within it thrived uncountable lives. Ferns leaned into cracks of light. Creeping plants climbed upward, clinging to bark that bore the marks of centuries. Pollen drifted invisibly, spores rode currents of sunlit air. Tiny stories of growth carried silently through beams of gold. And hidden within creatures, some enormous, some delicate, moving in ways we can only imagine. Forests of the Jurassic were more than environments. They were labyrinths of time, layered and recursive. Each branch held not only a moment of life but a fragment of eternity. What did sunlight feel like here, filtering down through such distance? Perhaps it was never whole by the time it reached the forest floor. Each leaf took its portion of warmth, each branch stretched out to claim its share, until what was left below was less illumination and more memory of light. Filtered, softened, already transformed by countless layers above. To stand in this forest was to stand in history itself, where even sunlight arrived changed by passage. The canopy itself was not still. It swayed, moaned, whispered in the wind, creating a music made from millions of leaves brushing against each other. The rhythm would have been slow, endless, almost hypnotic. And into each gap where branches opened, into each fracture of the sky, spores rose upward like tiny emissaries of time. The ferns and conifers beneath could not move, but their spores and seeds traveled unseen, perhaps carried by insect wings, perhaps by the steps of dinosaurs brushing against undergrowth, perhaps simply drifting until gravity called them down. Such small fragments carried futures in their fragile skin, proof that life's grand cycles were often built on the smallest of whispers. Science tells us that ancient forests exhaled vast amounts of oxygen, creating atmospheres heavier with breath than the one we inhale now. Every part of the canopy, from its tallest boughs to its fallen needles, participated in this exchange, water rising, oxygen flowing, carbon drawn down into root and bark. The canopy was the lung of the world, and the world itself was changed by each breath it gave. To live within it was to be part of that great respiration. And yet, there is also strangeness within these heights. We often imagine time as a line, one event after another, moving forward without pause. But here, among the Jurassic treetops, time seems different. It feels circular. Seeds fall, grow, climb toward the sky, only to fall and grow again. Spores drift upward, caught in beams of broken light, then return downward to begin their quiet work in soil's shadow. Each life is short, but together they form patterns stretched across epochs, repeating rhythms written not for us, but for themselves. Time here does not hurry. It waits. It loops. It multiplies silently across layers of leaf, air, and shadow. Perhaps this is why standing beneath the canopy feels so haunting. Even today, when we look up into any forest's green ceiling, we look not only into height but into history, into something older than us and older than memory itself. Could the canopy of the Jurassic, with its thickness and weight, have carried that same feeling? Did creatures that walked the earth sense the immensity above them? Could they feel, even dimly, that the forest was not just shelter but time itself, alive and patient, expanding upward in ways that minds could not contain? The paleontological traces we uncover, fossilized pollen, delicate impressions of ferns preserved in fine stone, are but hints of that vast upper world. Yet science has shown that these faint residues are records, carrying within them the chemistry of sunlight, the isotopic whisper of skies millions of years gone. In each microscopic fossil we are holding, quite literally, the breath and light of the canopy. It is stone that keeps this memory, yet the forest must have known it first. And if forests can press their memory into stone, from root to trunk to treetop, then maybe each canopy that has ever stretched above this earth exists still in fragments, threaded into the air we breathe, the fuel we burn, the air we exhale in return. The Jurassic canopy might not be gone at all, but folded into us, waiting quietly in our veins. Above us, the canopies of time still rise, not only as relics but as echoes. We stand beneath them in wonder and silence, knowing our sight falls short of their true immensity. They remind us that life unfolds not only forward but upward, layer after layer, toward something we will never fully see. And yet, if the canopy holds memory in its breath and spores, if every beam of fractured sunlight carries traces of life, then what else might be pressing stories into this labyrinth of time? What moved silently beneath the green shadows, shaping memory in steps too heavy to ignore? Beneath the cathedral canopy, where light fell in fractured patterns on the forest floor, there moved the oldest shadows, not shadows of trees or clouds, but of living giants. Dinosaurs. They did not march through the Jurassic wilderness as monsters in constant noise, but as slow-moving presences that filled the silence without breaking it. Imagine the long necks of sauropods stretching upward, higher even than the reaching conifers, their heads swaying like drifting ships above the canopy, plucking at leaves that never felt the touch of smaller creatures. Imagine stegosaurs, broad and deliberate, grazing low beneath cycads, pulling life from plants that had already existed for millions of years before them. Each step, each shift of weight, was a reminder that the earth beneath the canopy was not fixed. With every thunderous press of foot into soft mud, a story was written. Most would be erased within hours by rain or the trampling of others, but a precious few would endure, sun-dried into clay, buried beneath silt, hardened under pressure into stone. And those rare ones, kept safe for millions of years, are the evidence we cradle today, records of movement that once stirred the green silence of an ancient forest. A footprint looks small when set against the immensity of time, yet it is everything, proof that something immense, something breathing and alive, once stood in that vanished place. The giants shaped their forests in ways we can only dimly imagine. When herds moved, they opened paths through dense undergrowth. When they grazed, they trimmed branches, setting in motion new growth cycles for plants waiting in the shadows. Even their dung seeded the soil, dispersing spores and feeding insects at scales beyond measure. The forest was not separate from them. The forest depended on them. And so, in ways both subtle and vast, the giants were curators of their own time. Their movements must have felt both heavy and slow, forcing every smaller creature to pause, to wait, to adjust. Yet for all their weight and scale, even the giants were fragile against the patience of stone. Bones broke, bodies sank into mud. Much of what they were became soil, feeding exactly the forests they once walked through. The line between memory and presence blurred. A giant might seem eternal when alive, but the truth was softer. They, too, became part of the landscape, their presence written into cycles they could not outlive. Scientists today study the fossils of these immense beings. Limb bones stronger than pillars, teeth worn by foliage, tail spikes buried for eons in silent strata. But fossils are not only bones. Where a sauropod trod, the pressure of its foot compressed sediments that shifted underwater, reshaped layers, set the foundations for new terrains. Entire valleys and floodplains bear the subtle marks of their presence. Could it be that dinosaurs not only lived in the forests, but sculpted them both in life and in the stone record that followed? And what did it feel like to stand among them? Our imaginations often race toward noise and chaos, but perhaps the greater truth is calm. Breathing deeper than any breeze, the giants passed like moving parts of the landscape itself. Their long shadows stretched across ferns. Their low rumbles vibrated through roots into the soil. You would not have needed to see them, you would have felt them. And in that feeling, you would have known that the forest was not merely home to giants. It was the giant itself. Every branch, every trunk, every tail and step and echo. A single organism, one body, one memory, quietly moving through time. And yet even giants cannot claim eternity. Their bones, their shadows, their voices dissolved into silence. Still, the stone holds them, not in completeness, but in fragments. A footprint, a plate, a ripple in sediment. All pieces of a story that spans not years but millions of years. From these fragments, we remember what they could not hold themselves. From these imprints, the giants live again in wonder. And if these colossal lives could vanish into soil and stone, leaving only traces for us to rediscover, then what of the smaller ones who walked underfoot, the creatures who thrived in twilight hours, shaping the forest in ways that giants never noticed? If so much memory can be pressed into stone by size and shadow, what fragile stories might lie hidden in silence, carried only by water and time? The giants have moved on, their shadows fading into memory, but the ground they once pressed underfoot did not remain still. Nothing in the forest ever truly stands unchanged. Rivers carved their way through valleys, streams coiled and bent, drawing new paths with every season of rain. And as water moved, the land itself learned patience. What once seemed unshakable, cliffs, ridges, hardened stone, became pliable against the persistence of flow. Erosion is not sudden, not loud, not violent. It is the Earth's quiet process of remembering and forgetting, a dissolving of surfaces until what was hidden below is revealed again. Imagine standing beside a Jurassic river, its surface gleaming with filtered light spilling through the canopy above. To the creatures who drank there, it was water and nourishment. But to the land, each ripple was slow chiseling, a blade far gentler than any claw, yet infinitely more enduring. Over centuries, pebbles shifted, sand traveled, layers of silt carried downstream to basins where they would settle and harden again into stone. And with each gesture of flow, the forest itself changed. Tracks sank only to be erased. Fallen trees became soil. Fossils waiting in shallow mud either sank deeper into protection or dissolved into nothing. Erosion carries away not just matter, but memory. For every footprint we marvel at today, how many more were swept into silence? For every fossil pressed safely into strata, how many stories of bone and bark dissolved, washed away before they could be written into stone? It is tempting to imagine the earth recording everything, keeping archives in orderly layers. But the truth is gentler and more haunting. Nature selects what to remember and what to let go. It chooses through chance, through current, through the unhurried grind of wind and water. If time is a vast library, erosion is the librarian who sometimes tears away entire shelves without warning. And yet, what vanishes is not truly gone. Stone carried outward becomes sand, and sand becomes part of new shores. Elements broken down by rivers flow into oceans, where they may nourish life that would never have existed without ancient dissolution. Even forgetting feeds creation. Loss makes room for transformation. The isotopes locked in one age drift into another, so that the air we breathe tonight carries atoms cycled through forest floods hundreds of millions of years past. To us, erosion can feel cruel, as though something precious is taken away from history's table. But perhaps the process is less erasure and more reshaping, a reminder that permanence was never promised. Nothing stands in one place forever. Not a mountain, not a species, not a forest. Water always knows another way. Wind always carries fragments farther than we expect. In this endless patience, memory becomes something fluid. Consider the landscapes we see today. Cliffs ringed with color, bands of stone layered like pages in a deep-time book. Those ridges exist because erosion stripped away what once concealed them. Without loss, we would never see what lay hidden. In ancient forests, erosion was sculptor and storyteller, reshaping river valleys that dinosaurs wandered through, lifting some roots into view while burying others completely, deciding without malice which fragments of the Jurassic would survive into our age. And if the Earth can so easily forget, what does that say about us? Just as rivers wash footprints, time washes memories. Our thoughts, our moments, even our civilizations, drift toward erosion in their own way, sometimes leaving faint impressions, sometimes lost entirely to silence. Could it be that the forests of the Jurassic are not entirely erased, but are instead living on somewhere beyond recognition, recast as other forms, other matter, integrated into everything that followed? When we hold a fossil or read a stratum, we are really studying what erosion allowed to remain. Every discovery is less a complete record than the fragment of what was not destroyed. We live amid ruins, not because time is savage, but because time is selective in ways we cannot predict. Perhaps memory is never meant to be whole. Perhaps wholeness belongs only to the forest in the moment it lived, under the canopy where erosion had not yet begun. So as rivers cut their winding channels, as cliffs fell grain by grain into currents, the Jurassic world surrendered to a forgetting as vast and patient as stone itself. Whole ages flowed quietly away, leaving us only glimpses, fragments, impressions frozen in places water happened to spare. The Earth does not cling. The Earth releases. And if lands as old and magnificent as these can vanish into sand and sea, then it asks us a quiet question. How much of the past have we already lost, long before we even knew it existed? And yet, if so much can be erased, what fragile traces might still be hidden, waiting just below the surface, untouched by rivers, suspended in silence, waiting for eyes that have not yet looked? From the rivers that washed away footprints and dissolved entire stories back into silence, something smaller persisted. Fragile, drifting, almost invisible. Spores and seeds. While erosion carved valleys and reshaped stone, these tiny particles carried continuity forward, floating across canopies, hitching rides on the movements of beasts, scattering into cracks of soil where new life would rise. If erosion is forgetfulness, spores and seeds are memory's gentle counterweight, proof that life insists on persistence, even in its most delicate forms. In the Jurassic, spores fell like dust. Ferns released them in quiet clouds, invisible gatherings rising through beams of filtered light before descending again, settling into damp ground or slipping into rivulets that carried them further than their parent plants could reach. Each spore, smaller than sight yet complex beyond imagination, carried within it an archive written not in language but in code. DNA coiled tightly, waiting. It held instructions that had already survived eons, passed down through lineages stretching back to the very first plants that learned to anchor into soil. The forest may have looked fleeting under erosion's erosion, but within these spores was permanence, a design chosen by time and patience, encoded resilience shaping the memory of whole ecosystems. Seeds, too, drifted through this world of giants. Conifers released cones whose papery scales opened to drop small packages into the undergrowth, or sent them flying on winds that pierced the canopy. Insects carried the smallest spores clinging to their limbs, and herbivorous dinosaurs aided the journey of tougher seeds, swallowing them whole only to disperse them later in another place, nourished by the soil created from dung. Here was memory not preserved in stone, but written in continuity. Living archives that carried the essence of forests into futures the parent trees could never see. Compare this to fossils, heavy, locked within sediment, silent until the earth permits discovery. Fossils preserve what once was, but spores and seeds preserve what may still become. Which holds more memory? Then, the imprint of a leaf pressed into shale, or the genetic blueprint of that same leaf living forward in descendants millions of years later? Fossils remind us of what has died. Seeds remind us of the persistence of life. Both speak, but in different tones, one in silence, one in breath. And yet their survival was never promised. Most spores fell uselessly where they could not root. Most seeds vanished into erosion, consumed before they could take hold. From millions, only a handful succeeded. But perhaps memory does not require abundance. It requires only enough to endure, enough to carry its archive into the next cycle. The message is simple but profound. Not all that is lost matters, but all that endures carries forward everything necessary. Scientists today analyze spores trapped in fine sediments or seeds preserved in amber, finding that even in their fragility, these archives remain astonishingly precise. Through microscopic study, we see cell walls, isotopic traces that whisper of the air they inhaled and the water they drank. Their DNA, sometimes even partially surviving across unimaginable spans, gives us a glimpse into the persistence of code that outlives kingdoms, empires, entire species. These are memory keepers not because they endure unchanged, but because they offer possibility, the chance for life to right itself again. Think of a forest floor in the Jurassic, damp and alive. Sauropods stride past, shaking the earth with each step. Insects buzz in myriad frequencies. Above, the canopy fractures sunlight into shifting mosaics. And within the breeze, fragile clouds of spores rise and fall. Unseen to the giants, unnoticed by even the most attentive predator, these invisible travelers were shaping the destiny of the forests themselves. With each drift, they pushed life forward, not in leaps, but in tiny repetitions, millions upon millions of soft beginnings. Perhaps this is what memory truly is, both for nature and for us. Not the static preservation of a perfect moment, carved unchanging in stone, but the repetition of small patterns that carry meaning forward. Each seed replicates, each spore disperses, repeating the same designs through different times until history itself resembles a great canopy. Layered, recursive, unbroken even when entire branches fall to silence. And so we are left to wonder, is the memory hidden in fragile spores more powerful than the enduring fossil? Could it be that life's insistence on renewal carries a deeper message than stone ever could? Fossils remind us of endings, but seeds remind us of continuations. Both whisper truths and both are incomplete without the other. Think of the ginkgo tree, whose leaves unfurl across cities today in fan-shaped patterns identical to those that shaded the footsteps of stegosaurs. Its seeds carried that memory forward through fire, famine, extinction, and survival, until they planted themselves into present time without translation. That is not chance alone. That is memory bearing itself into being, silently, without demand. And yet, even here lies uncertainty. For every ginkgo, there are countless other species whose seeds did not endure, whose spores vanished into soils no longer able to sustain them. Their memories are gone, dissolved into silence as surely as stone washed away by rivers. Memory, even in spores and seeds, is fragile. Perhaps it is this fragility that makes it sacred. And so, among the towering forests, spores continued to fall, and seeds continued to scatter. Story by story, season by season, they blended the past with the possible, the ended with the yet to come. They did not preserve time perfectly, as fossils do, but they carried it forward in another form, breathing, waiting, unfolding slowly into new green shadows. And if such fragile things can carry the weight of entire forests, what else in this world might move unseen around us, drifting forward with memory written not in stone and not in silence, but in the breath of renewal? From the smallest spores drifting on currents, we lift our eyes again to the greater body of the forest itself. A body that was not only rooted in soil, not only layered in canopy, but alive in the very air it released. Every fern, every conifer, every towering tree of the Jurassic participated in a slow exhalation that reached beyond their leaves, filling the atmosphere with an invisible gift, oxygen. We often think of forests as silent and still, yet they breathed with persistence and scale, shaping not only landscapes but the air itself, the very substance that allowed all creatures to live and move beneath the canopy's shade. The Jurassic atmosphere was richer with oxygen than the one we breathe now. That enrichment was no accident. It was the work of countless green organisms, capturing sunlight and transforming it into chemical energy, drawing carbon into their tissues and giving back oxygen to the sky. Each leaf was both a receiver and a giver, a membrane where the planet exchanged one form of life into another, and multiplied across millions of acres of forest. Those countless exchanges became collaboration. Stone, soil, foliage, and time weaving together to make an atmosphere that nurtured giants. Imagine the vast lungs of a forest, vast not because of size but because of repetition. Leaf after leaf, spore after spore, each extending small breaths outward. Alone, each exhalation was fragile. Together, they changed the planet. Could the dinosaurs have grown as immense as they did without the deep sky gift of these forests? Could their lungs have carried such creatures if the trees had not worked so patiently to prepare the air first? Perhaps the greatest engineers of the Jurassic were not the animals at all, but the plants, architects of air, architects of possibility, unnoticed yet fundamental. Walking among these giants, you might not have noticed their breath, yet you would have felt it. The air would have been damp, dense with moisture, imbued with sharp traces of resin and the subtler tang of pollen. To breathe here was to inhale the forest itself, to share its chemistry, to take its memory into your body without ever realizing it. Forests did not only build environments outside of us. They entered us, cycle by cycle, lung by lung. Even now, with every breath we take, fragments of that ancient history may still be circulating, atoms once released in Jurassic exhalations preserved and reshuffled by the atmosphere's endless loops. Science reminds us that oxygen is not permanent. It rises, reacts, vanishes, returns. Cycles keep it alive. Carbon is drawn into stone, buried by tectonic churn, only to be loosed again by volcanic fire. Nitrogen seeps from soil into sky, then back down again in rainfall. The air cannot keep still. It moves constantly like tides. To live is to be part of this invisible ocean, shaped continually by the respiration of countless unseen processes. Forests in the Jurassic may not have known this with thought, but they lived it fully in practice. Their breath was a tide as real as any river, flooding the atmosphere with quiet generosity. And yet air, like memory, is fragile. Forests that exhale into the sky also inhale from it. They depend on balance. Too little oxygen, too much carbon, and cycles falter. We wonder how stable those balances truly were. Did climate swells tip the ratios? Did eruptions poison the air? Is it possible whole forests rose and fell with each atmospheric lurch, carrying life upward with their breath, then surrendering it back when balance broke? What would it feel like to live with an air that was always uncertain, yet always renewing? There is humility in knowing that the oxygen entering our lungs tonight may be the same that once slipped between the fronds of a Jurassic fern. Invisible, untraceable, but present. Breath is memory carried quietly forward, flowing not in fossils or seeds, but through the body itself. We breathe each other's past without knowing it. Perhaps forests are not just rooted memories but living archives, not only because they write stories into stone and seed, but because they keep rewriting the atmosphere we depend on. And so, when we imagine the Jurassic forest, it is not just trunks and leaves, not just giants moving through undergrowth, but breath itself, filling everything. It was a collaboration so immense we still live within its results. The forests of that age shaped air, and the air shaped life, a partnership so quiet and constant we only notice it when it is gone. And yet, if every breath carries memory, then what of the sounds that once filled that oxygen-rich sky? What of the insect wings, the calls of creatures, the evening chorus that sang through the canopy? If the air remembers oxygen, might it also remember voices? If the forests exhaled breath into the Jurassic sky, it was the insects who turned that sky into song. As twilight settled between the trees, the canopy softened into shadow, and the voices that rose to claim the dusk were not the footfalls of giants, not the calls of predators, but the steady drone of wings. An ancient choir, layered and patient, endless in rhythm and tone. Dragonflies hovered like restless spirits of air, their wings wide as human hands, vibrating with a silken hum. Beetles ticked and clicked as armored bodies rubbed against bark. Cicada-like beings thrummed through the darkening glades, a resonance that ran not only through branches but through the soil beneath them. The insect choir was the music of the forest, filling the silence shaped by trees and carried forward by air. And yet, for all their noise, they were creatures often unnoticed. In the presence of stegosaur plates glinting beneath the canopy, or the immense sway of a sauropod's neck above the crowns. These smaller lives seemed insignificant, but their roles were threads in the larger web, essential to all that walked beneath the green. Beetles decomposed fallen wood, recycling what giants left behind. Dragonflies patrolled still waters, keeping balances unseen. Pollinators, small and vast, carried spores and seeds across distances impossible for plants to manage on their own. From the shadows, they maintained the forest's hidden circulations, its invisible partnerships. Giants may have seemed like rulers, but the forest's true sustainers were those who filled the dusk with sound. Their music was not decoration. It was signal, it was rhythm, it was work. To other insects, the buzzes and clicks spoke of territory, of attraction, of warning. To us, quiet listeners across the ages, it feels like something more, a sonorous reminder that silence is never as empty as it seems. Beneath the groan of branches, beneath the breath of the forest, strands of life vibrated ceaselessly. Perhaps the forest itself was never truly still, but always trembling slightly with wings. Insects embody a paradox. They are fleeting, fragile, ephemeral in form, yet they are among time's most enduring survivors. Fossils of insect wings, imprinted in stone more delicate than paper, tell us they flew long before dinosaurs and will likely fly long after. Their bodies may erode quickly, soft shells dissolving before becoming stone, but their work is not erased. Their influence remains embedded in sediment, pollen trails, chemical balances written in isotopic whispers. Even where their wings leave no fossil, their presence is detectable in all that grew and thrived around them. Could it be that their memory is not kept in their own remains, but in the flourishing of everything they touched? As night deepened in the Jurassic forest, the insect choir shifted tone. Some wings stilled while others began, creating waves of alternating sound that rose and fell like breathing. Dinosaurs may have wandered the dark in search of food, but the dominant impression of those hours was not the low rumble of distant steps, but the unbroken fabric of insect voices, weaving sound into every hollow and every branch. To live here, in twilight, was to be immersed in the reminder that life is carried forward not only by giants, but by an innumerable chorus of the small. Science reveals this too in the fine details left behind. Layers of amber preserve insects in exquisite patience. A beetle caught mid-climb, a gnat tangled in resin, wings forever spread although the body no longer moves. Inside those tiny prisons, we peer into time as though through a window, seeing what normally vanishes without trace. These are not fossils of bone. They are fossils of breath and song, of wings paused mid-flight. And in their silence, we almost hear them again, the faint hum of the insect choirs long gone. Perhaps that is why their memory feels so haunting. We think of forests as dominated by the colossal, ruled by predators and survivors of monumental scale. But if you listened carefully in those days, it was not the heavy steps you would hear most. It was the wings, tiny, patient, eternal. Long after bodies fell, long after ferns withered and rivers shifted, wings drummed the reminders of cycles. They pollinated, they dismantled, they sang. Not because they were strong, but because they were continuous. And this is true still. To this day, insects hold our ecosystems aloft more delicately than we realize. Without their constant, unnoticed work, the larger forms of life, ourselves included, could not endure. So when we imagine the Jurassic forest, let us not forget the smallest ones, the constant voices of twilight. For they remind us that history is never only written by the large and the loud. It is equally, perhaps more profoundly, sustained by the soft and the overlooked. And yet, if the smallest lives can shape entire forests simply by their rhythms and breath, what of the more violent rhythms of the land itself? The eruptions, the fire, the falling ash that could silence even the insect choir in a moment? The insect choir hummed through the twilight, a rhythm as steady as breath itself. But even their endless wings could not quiet the greater forces that stirred beneath the earth. For under the roots of the forest, far beneath the rivers and the stone, deeper than the patience of soil, there were chambers of fire. Volcanoes waited, not with rage, not with purpose, but with inevitability. And when they stirred, the green dominion of the Jurassic was reminded that even the oldest forests could not sing forever without silence arriving to change the tune. Imagine the first tremors, a subtle vibration through the canopy, where leaves shivered though no wind moved. Animals paused, heads lifted, as the ground itself shifted in its sleep. Then the roar, not unlike thunder, stretched across hours, as molten fissures tore upward and released the planet's hidden breath. Eruptions sent fire into a world of green. Trees that had stood for centuries burned in moments. Canopies that towered like living cathedrals collapsed into sparks and ash. Entire landscapes dissolved into smoke, silencing choirs, scattering giants, writing endings into valleys that might once have seemed eternal. And yet, within that destruction was also renewal. Ash blanketed soil, smothering roots, burying fallen giants so quickly that some became preserved, sealed into layers for future eyes to uncover. Seeds trapped beneath did not always die. Some waited. And the ash itself, filled with minerals released from deep within the earth, became nourishment when rains returned. Forests blackened into silence, but from that silence rose the resilience of green. Shoots pushed up through the dust. New spores scattered across scorched plains. As quickly as destruction came, life began again, patient, persistent, certain. This duality is older than memory. Fire consumes, but fire also clears. Ash buries, but ash also feeds. Perhaps the lesson of volcanoes is not only ruin, but rhythm, for nothing lives forever without interruption. Nothing thrives forever without the sting of being undone. The forests, vast as they were, depended on these cycles. Stability is comforting, but it is interruption that ensures the world keeps moving. Without fresh ash to feed the soil, many of the great forests might have faltered. Without burial, fossils would not exist. Without collapse, renewal would lose its foothold. In the fossil record, we see this balance written clearly. Beneath layers of igneous rock, we discover whole forests petrified, trees turned entirely into stone, their cellular structures preserved so perfectly that even their rings can be counted. What for them was a moment of utter devastation became, for us, a window into time. This is the paradox erosion and eruption both share. To destroy is also to reveal. Think of it this way. When we hold a piece of petrified wood from that age, we cradle both destruction and survival. It is wood, yet it is stone. It was forest, yet it is fossil. The eruption that smothered its life gave it eternity. How many such moments lie buried beneath plains and mountain ranges, sealed away, waiting for another cycle to bring them back into the light? And if destruction truly partners with renewal, what does this mean for us? It is a question as much existential as it is geological. Our endings may also feed futures we will never see. Our silence may nurture voices not yet born. Just as the forests once burned and bloomed again, perhaps we, too, are woven into cycles where nothing is truly lost, nothing except the illusion of permanence. Even the giants knew this in their bodies, though unconsciously. They moved through forests that rose from older ruins. They grazed beneath canopies that already carried ash deep in their roots. Renewal is not merely hope. It is memory embodied in matter. Every fern reborn in volcanic soil held silent proof of an earlier fire. And so, the Green Dominion learned to live with fire. Its resilience was not in avoiding destruction but in accepting it, folding it into the very logic of existence. Each eruption was an ending, but also a seed. Each ashfall was a silence, but also a soil. With every new forest, the planet was not simply repeating life, but rewriting it, adding another layer to the unending manuscript of time. And yet, if fire could consume so much and still leave space for renewal, what else might be buried in silence, sealed away beneath layers of ash and mud, waiting for rivers to uncover, waiting for us to notice? From fire and falling ash, we turn again to water. Where volcanoes buried forests in sudden silence, rivers wrote their stories differently, not in eruption, but in layers. They moved without hurry, carrying fragments of the land with every turn. Sediment loosened by rain slipped quietly into their arms, carried grain by grain, washed into floodplains and deltas. Bones sank here. Spores settled here. Even the faintest footprints pressed into soft mud hardened as riverbanks shifted, frozen into stone for ages beyond the creatures that left them. The Jurassic rivers were not only carriers of life, but keepers of memory. Every flood scoured the forest floor, lifting away debris, mixing it with sand, and layering it into new ground downstream. A tree trunk could be buried here, an insect wing sealed there, a claw or a tooth swept further and encased without intention. With time, cycles of flooding folded layer after layer into sediment so deep that, when we cut through today, we see each band like a page in an ancient book. Without meaning to, rivers became archivists, carefully disordered, yet precise enough to carry whispers of vanished lives into a future that had no witnesses yet to read them. Imagine a shallow bend in such a river. Dinosaurs gather there, drinking from its mirrored surface. A dragonfly hovers just above the reeds at the edge. A sauropod shifts its enormous weight, stepping into the bank. The mud holds the impression for a moment, then begins to collapse. But rains arrive, the river swells, and the footprint fills. Silt covers it. Later more layers are added, pressing it into something more durable than memory. What was once a fleeting moment, a step no more, is captured by chance into stone. Millions of years later, we would find it intact, a mirroring of presence across oceans of time. This is how the river keeps its library. Not deliberately, not even evenly, but through endless patience. What it forgets, it washes away into oblivion. What it remembers, it entombs without reason. We read it today in fossils and strata, but rarely do we pause to wonder what we are missing. For every fossil found in river sediment, thousands more have vanished, dissolved before preservation could occur. The archive is vast, but partial, like a story with most of its chapters torn away. Is this forgetfulness? Or is it simply another way of choosing? Does the earth decide which stories to keep? Or is chance the only author here? Geology offers us some answers. In the isotopes preserved in river sediments, we can measure past climates, trace oxygen levels in water, and reconstruct shifts in rainfall across ages. In pollen grains laid down in quiet floodplains, we can still identify species that once grew along the river's banks. Even the smallest fragments become records, carried forward in the river's current toward its patient archive. The rivers may not have known, but they were historians nonetheless, scribes of sediment. And what are rivers, if not metaphors for time itself? They flow always forward, and yet in their currents they recycle. Water evaporates, returns, falls again. Sediment is lifted, carried, laid down, buried, and lifted once more in another age. A river forgets nothing entirely. It just redistributes memory, carrying fragments into places far beyond their origins. Perhaps this is part of why fossils strike us as so haunting, because they remind us that every footprint, every bone, every seed might easily have been erased, but was not. Out of countless possibilities, a fragment endured. To hold a fossil from a Jurassic river is to hold not only the bone of a creature, but the patience of water, the silence of silt, and the chance of burial that allowed it to be kept. Without rivers, the forests would have vanished into pure ash, into absence. With rivers, shadows of them live on. Not complete, not whole, but enough to stir wonder. And yet rivers, like memory itself, never stay still. They meander, cut new paths, abandon old ones. They leave behind oxbows and shifting plains, carrying stories further downstream than any one forest could comprehend. The archive of the river is not bound to one place, but spread wide, scattered across deltas, buried beneath layers that only deep time can settle into stone. And where those stones now rise, as cliffs we peer into, as canyons carved once more by water, we glimpse the library hidden inside. Perhaps the river is not just an archivist, but a mirror of time's character, forward-flowing, yet endlessly looping, never fixed yet always leaving traces. If so, then the question lingers. How much of the Jurassic remains in sediment still buried, hidden in floodplains we have not yet touched, waiting for us to notice, waiting for us to read? And yet, if rivers could become libraries of stone, archiving even the faintest lives, then what of the night itself, when sound and breath became archives of another kind? What songs might have risen through the canopies and lingered in the air long after the waters had fallen silent? When the rivers settled and the floodplains rested, night crept gently across the Jurassic forest. Day's brightness withdrew from the canopy, and what had shimmered with greens and golds dimmed into shadow. Yet night was not silence. It was a different kind of voice, softer but no less alive. Croaks reverberated from hidden pools. Chirps wove invisible patterns in the dark. And every so often, far in the distance, the faint thunder of footsteps echoed, as though the giants shifted uneasily in their sleep. Darkness here belonged not to the colossal forms but to the small, the quick, the careful. Close your eyes and imagine it. The air heavy with moisture, cooled now after the weight of the day. Above, the canopy becomes a silhouette of tangled branches, faint starlight slipping into slender fragments where leaves give way. And then the chorus begins. Frogs erupt in low, pulsing croaks, their voices resonant within the echoing hollows of tree roots. Insects thrum in unison, higher tones hovering ceaselessly, threads of vibration binding the night together. Somewhere, a chirp cuts short, as though interrupted. Darkness carries its own suspense, its own gravity, making every sound feel more vivid. The night forest was not empty. It was a theater alive with breath. This is where the small and the swift inherited their dominion. Feathered hunters crept through shadows, claws brushing softly across fern fronds still damp from daytime rain. Their eyes, keener than ours could comprehend, caught the faint gleam of movement in the dark. A rustle, a wing beat, a heartbeat in waiting. Unlike the day, where size ruled the canopy, night offered the stage to cunning and speed. Small predators, their plumage blending into the undergrowth, hunted beneath the stars, chasing mammals and lizards who darted unseen. And alongside them mammals, no larger than rats, whiskered and warm-blooded, pursued their careful lives. They scampered beneath cycads, fed on insects, sniffed through leaf litter in search of seeds and grubs. To us they appear insignificant compared to giants who towered through the day, but here in the night they thrived, overlooked yet persistent, biding their time in silence, unaware of futures they would inherit when the giants were gone. The night forest also belonged to sound itself. Imagine lying amid fallen needles, drowsy with the warmth still clinging to the air, hearing the lullaby not of human voices but of creatures long vanished, the layered choruses of insect hum, amphibian croak, reptilian hiss. Breathing there would be different. The oxygen-rich air seemed to thrum with life, carrying vibrations far and deep. Sleep might arrive not under silence, but under music, the lullaby of a planet woven in tongues beyond our translation. Could creatures of the Jurassic dream as we do, drifting into unconscious stories shaped by the same sounds that filled their waking hours? Did a mammal pup fall asleep to the resonance of insects in the dark, unaware that its descendants would one day wonder the same? Science offers us fragments of this memory. Fossilized laryngeal structures hint at possible calls in certain dinosaurs, suggesting that some species might have cooed or trumpeted through the night. Amber entombs not only insects but air bubbles, tiny records of the Jurassic sky, suggesting what sounds may have vibrated through its density. When we imagine the sounds, we draw from comparisons, from ecology, from rhythms that persist even today. Yet there must have been songs lost completely, calls with no descendant, voices that vanished without leaving an echo. The night forest reminds us that for every chorus we can guess, there are tones forever past our hearing. Perhaps this is why the thought of Jurassic nights feels so haunting. Not because of claws waiting in the dark, but because of the sheer fullness of life. Music rising from every scale of being, morning choruses and twilight choirs, each shaping the sense of place for creatures who no longer walk among us. To listen is to dream, to recognize that sound is another kind of memory, fragile yet enduring, folding itself into environments in ways fossils alone cannot capture. So what would it be like to dream through those nights? To rest beneath tree ferns, eyes closed, lulled into slumber by creatures whose songs no longer have names? Perhaps dreams themselves carry threads of such memories. The instinctive fear of movement in the dark, the comfort of steady rhythms, the primal recognition of calls we no longer hear but still sense deep in memory. Sleep, like fossilization, is a kind of preservation, holding fleeting impressions just long enough to bridge the waking and the vanished. The forest by day was ruled by light and shadow, but by night, it was ruled by voices, by the unseen. Living threads pulled the hours together, weaving sound against silence, breath against breath. The lullaby of the Jurassic was not one song but countless, rising and falling, fading and returning. To drift to sleep here is to surrender to the ancient music of a world where nothing was ever truly still. And yet, if nights were filled with such voices, if every darkened hour throbbed with sound and song, then what messages did the soil itself carry in silence beneath those calls? What stories lay buried in the earth, cycles playing out invisibly while creatures sang above? Beneath the songs of the night, beneath the footsteps of giants and the hum of insects, beneath roots that clasp stone and rivers that archive time, there is soil. Always soil. It seems so ordinary, so silent, yet it never rests. To step into a Jurassic forest was to step into an unceasing process, a quiet engine that consumed, transformed, and created all at once. The soil did not sleep even when night held the air still. With every fallen leaf it worked, with every carcass it swallowed, with every rain that sank into its pores, it kept cycles moving forward without pause. Touch a handful of soil today and you hold history itself, minerals ground from older rocks, organic fragments of plants long broken, microscopic lives too small to see yet vast in number. Now imagine that in the Jurassic scale. The bodies of ferns falling season after season, trunks collapsing when storms cut them down, insect remains returning to ground almost as soon as wings ceased. Even the colossal weight of dinosaurs, once they fell, became part of that endless consumption. Flesh dissolved, bone weakened, marrow seeped outward, and in time every fragment was transformed. In soil, nothing permanent stood apart. Every ending became input for something else. Entropy lived here, but creation lived here too. It was not decay or growth alone, but both together inextricable. The soil held isotopic echoes, carbon ratios reflecting the breath of the forests, oxygen markers carried down from rain cycles, nitrogen folded into root channels where fungi and bacteria transformed it into nourishment. What we see now in thin slices through ancient stone are these isotopic fingerprints, fragments of conversation between life and earth. A reminder that soil is less material than it is memory, a chemical library for those patient enough to learn its language. In this sense, the soil was an unseen storyteller. It did not preserve form the way fossils do, holding shapes frozen against time. Preserved process. In its grains and compositions we can trace how warm the climate once was, how wet the cycles of rain, how forests breathed and released into air. Soil, then, is not only below us, it is within us. Every leaf eaten, every breath taken, every life lived in the Jurassic owed something to the ground's patient regeneration. It may feel strange to imagine that the same material beneath our modern feet still carries fragments of those ancient cycles. Yet soil is never truly new. It is always recycled, broken and rebuilt, carried onward grain by grain from age into age. Perhaps nothing actually vanishes. Perhaps what we call disappearance is simply transformation into something else's beginning. Forest floor became soil. Soil became stone. Stone releases its atoms back to soil again when mountains fall. A cycle so patient it surpasses our comprehension, yet one that never stops moving. To the small mammals scurrying at night, the soil was shelter, loose enough to burrow, stable enough to hide. To seedlings, it was birth. To giant dinosaurs, it yielded grass-like fronds and cycads to graze, carried up from nutrients stored deep below. All relied on this hidden churn of decay into renewal. Giants may have ruled above, but nothing lived outside the soil's work. It supported every breath, every movement, simply by consuming and transforming without rest. And still today, If we set aside the hurry of our world and kneel, pressing our palms into the earth, we touch the same essential process. Move slow enough, and it is almost possible to feel the ground's patient hum. Its work so quiet that centuries can pass before we realize its change. To understand soil is to understand time itself, not as a line but as a cycle. Always moving forward, but also always returning, carrying echoes within each new layer. Nothing is wholly lost here. Not the leaves fallen millions of years ago, not the bones of giants, not the spores that missed their chance to bloom. All have been folded into the soil's patience, their atoms lifted into new places, into leaves, into air, into our bodies themselves. Soil is not only ground. It is passage, remembrance, continuation. And yet, if the soil holds the quiet cycles of everything that vanishes, consuming and regenerating again and again, what of those who persist without vanishing? What of the trees whose lineage endures across extinctions, stretching from deeper ages into ours, bearing witness not through decay but through survival? Not all stories of the Jurassic were written in endings. Some were written in endurance. While soils consumed and transformed, while forests rose and fell, while whole lineages vanished into fossils and whispers of isotopes, there were beings that persisted patiently, not by strength or size, but by simply continuing. Among them stood the ginkgo, a tree whose lineage stretched roots out of ages even older than the Jurassic, settling into that era as though it knew how to wait. The ginkgo did not dominate the forests like towering conifers. It did not spread with the lavish speed of ferns. Its persistence was quieter, steadier, marked by fan-shaped leaves that unfurled with the same simple grace season after season. For millions of years, these leaves opened to sunlight, performed the same exchanges of breath, released oxygen as ferns did, anchored into soils as pines did. But unlike many companions, the ginkgo did not vanish when climates shifted or when extinctions swept the land. It endured. It endures still, shading our streets, its leaves fluttering in breezes that carry no memory of the Jurassic, except for the presence of the tree itself. There is a kind of wisdom in that persistence. Some life thrives through dominance, expanding in numbers until the world bends around it. But dominance is fragile. When change comes, when cycles collapse, when balance tips, dominance shatters. The ginkgo teaches another rhythm. Hold quietly, live steadily, bend with change. Do not rush. Do not struggle to rule. Instead, wait. Generation after generation, it continued, while giants fell around it, while volcanic ash layered the earth, while rivers carried memory away. The tree that outlived them all was not triumphant. It was patient. When we study ancient leaves pressed into Jurassic stones, we recognize them instantly. The same delicate fans, the same veins stretching outward, unchanged across time, so vast it unsettles the mind. Here is memory not preserved in fossilized shadow alone, but alive still, living in our present. A child today may hold a ginkgo leaf and turn it gently in their fingers without realizing it is a living fossil, a moment of deep past folded into now. Few living things bridge ages in this way, as reminders, as connections, as witnesses. Perhaps that is the secret of endurance. Not strength, not dominance, but consistency. The patience to go on unchanged when the world rearranges itself. The ginkgo is not eternal, no life is, but across extinctions, across continents, across upheavals where climates turn to ash, this tree remained itself. It became a kind of planetary memory, living not in stone or in soil alone, but in green breath, in continuity, in repetition. And so, what wisdom might lie in its endurance? Perhaps it reminds us to value persistence more than conquest, to see survival not as a triumph of dominance but as a testament to patience, to adjustment, to waiting quietly while the world shifts. The ginkgo does not compete for grandeur, yet it still stands while so much else has vanished. And it is with us still, lining city streets, shading courtyards, its fan-shaped leaves falling into autumn gutters. Few who pass beneath it realize they are walking in the company of the Jurassic. Its roots stretch not beneath one age but across many. And in their continuity, they remind us, deep time is not gone. It is here, beside us, waiting without hurry. Think of it. A single tree species carrying on through mass extinctions, through the shifting of continents, through the rise and fall of entire kingdoms of animal life. A single presence spanning epochs, persisting not in silence but in breath, releasing oxygen alike into the lungs of sauropods and the lungs of modern cities. Living memory, unbroken. And yet, if one tree could outlast so many cycles, carrying its form unaltered into our present, what other lineages might still hold secrets of persistence? What other survivors might we overlook, their quiet wisdom hidden beneath our fascination with the vanished and the lost? The ginkgo survived because it knew how to wait, how to persist through change. And change in the Jurassic was as constant as the breath of the forests themselves. This was a greenhouse world, a planet wrapped in warmth. Oceans swelled with heavy moisture, sky draped in thick clouds, and land dripped endlessly with rain. To walk among the forests was to be immersed in humidity that clung to skin and scale alike, a world where every breath carried with it the weight of water. The climate was the invisible architect, shaping not only trees and rivers, but the choices, movements, and even the destinies of every creature within it. For much of the Jurassic, warmth bathed the continents. There were no polar ice caps as we know them today. Seas stretched across lowlands, flooding flats into lagoons and wetlands, while coastlines shifted constantly. The air rang with storms, lightning arcing across darkened skies, rain seeping into valleys that fed the forests. This warmth created abundance, lush vegetation for herbivores, endless cycles of foliage feeding life in monumental scale. But warmth is never permanent. Within it came instability. Droughts arrived without warning, and entire regions once swollen with rain cracked into dryness, forests collapsing into barren stretches until the cycles shifted again. We can see this now in isotopes locked into stone, oxygen ratios shifting in fossilized shells like whispers of climates long expired. They tell us that rainfall was not steady. Moisture came in waves, in rhythms that carried centuries of rain followed by centuries of scarcity. Amphibians thrived in the wet expanses, only to vanish when rivers ran low. Herds of giant dinosaurs migrated as landscapes turned from abundance to austerity. Forests endured, but never unchanged. The greenhouse warmth was both gift and challenge. It allowed enormous creatures to thrive, fueling ecosystems so lush they seem almost dreamlike to us now. And yet it carried the quiet threat of instability. Too much warmth, too much carbon, and oceans inhaled it hungrily, expanding their reach, drowning valleys and plains. Too little and droughts carved rivers dry, sending forests into patterns of decline. The balance between abundance and collapse was never secure. Imagine standing within such a world. Rain dripping from cycads, air heavy and dense, your feet sinking slightly into wet soil. Then, weeks later, the same place cracked and dry, streams dwindled, ferns curling inward, insects scattering in search of hidden pools. To live in the greenhouse world was to live in motion, never able to cling too tightly to one arrangement of life. Survival belonged to those who could move, who could shift with the climate's rhythm. Sauropods carried their vast bodies across distances in search of waters that still ran. Predators followed herds as they traveled. Even plants adapted, leaves narrowing or seeds toughening to withstand drought's sting. And still, mass extinctions lingered on the horizon. Reminders that no climate, no matter how lush, could promise stability forever. Was this a stable world? In some ways, yes. For millions of years, vast regions remained humid, green, abundant, and filled with life so immense we still marvel at its scale. But beneath that apparent stability lay currents of instability, cycles waiting quietly, pushing extinctions along, redirecting life without notice. The world was both stable and unstable, both generous and precarious. Perhaps this paradox was itself the essence of the greenhouse age. And if the Jurassic greenhouse climate shaped everything we know of this period, what echoes of it drift into our present? Our own age feels different, yet oddly familiar. Warmth rising, seas swelling, instability threading through our sense of stability. Do we live not in contrast, but in parallel, another chapter in the long rhythm of greenhouse cycles? For the forests of the Jurassic, survival meant accepting humidity's weight, drought silence, and the unpredictability of cycles. The ginkgo endured, not by resisting, but by embodying patience. Creatures adapted or vanished, but the climate went on, indifferent to their struggles. Perhaps the greatest force of all was not tooth or claw, but air itself, pressing its character into every life form, every migration, every extinction. And yet, if climate could shape time so profoundly, carrying abundance and endings woven together, what of the predators themselves who roamed beneath the canopy? What rhythms did they follow within this warmth? And how did their shadows alter the forest's balance? In the warmth of the Jurassic greenhouse world, the forest seemed endless. Canopies rising toward the humid sky, rivers carving memory into stone, cycles written in soil and seed. Yet within this abundance, there were shadows that moved with intent. Carnivores, they prowled not only with hunger, but with a role far larger than appetite. Within the fern thickets, their presence was both feared and necessary. For even in destruction, predators belonged to the green cathedral, serving it in ways deeper than they knew. Imagine the undergrowth, shafts of light piercing through ferns. A small herd of herbivores stirs nervously, sensing something hidden in the silence. The predator is there, motionless, eyes fixed, scales dark against the foliage. Whether a lithe theropod cloaked in feathers or a heavier hunter moving deliberately through the tangle, its role was not chaos but calibration. When the strike came, it left more behind than absence. Each kill returned energy to the soil, leaving openings in herds, freeing branches for renewal. Predation was not cruelty. It was collaboration written in cycles of need. Science tells us ecosystems thrive not in the absence of death but in its presence. Predators shape herds, keeping them from overrunning forests, ensuring that vegetation regenerates, and that soil is not stripped too bare. They cull the weak, scatter populations, create gaps into which seeds may root. Without predators, abundance tips into collapse. The Jurassic forests knew this instinctively, not through thought, but through repetition. The shadow among the ferns was not only danger, but balance. And footprints remain to remind us. In riverbeds turned to stone, predator tracks cross those of herbivores, frozen interactions we cannot rerun. Sometimes teeth are found still wedged in fossilized bone, evidence of pursuit caught in eternal pause. These are not merely signs of death. They are signals of the web at work, the endless shaping that predators enforced upon the living cathedral of green. Their presence altered behavior in ways subtle yet profound. Herds gathered closer, young protected in the center by the larger bodies of adults. Grazers shifted habits, feeding in safer clearings. Smaller creatures adapted their lives to shadows, moving swiftly when silence grew too long, hiding when forests grew too still. Even the plants, in a way, benefited when predators trimmed herbivore numbers, young shoots were spared, new growth able to rise out of reach once more. To think of predators only as bringers of death is to miss the symmetry. Each kill was not an end, but a redistribution. Energy taken from one form returned to others. Fallen bodies decomposed quickly, feeding soil, feeding insects, feeding smaller hunters that followed the larger ones. Nothing was wasted. The cathedral of trees remained steady precisely because of this endless exchange. Destruction here was a kind of service. Within this, though, lived unease, the same unease we feel still when shadows move at the edge of perception. Did the smaller creatures know some memory of danger when night fell silent? Did the giants, towering though they were, still keep watch for the tiny hunters agile enough to wound them? Could it be that the forest itself carried awareness of this balance, the way it adjusted growth, the way it recovered from each absence? Even sounds betrayed the predators. In the night forest, a sudden hush might ripple through insects and amphibians alike, as if they knew when silence carried heavier weight than song. To dream in such a place was to dream with one ear alert, half asleep, half listening to the balance of forest and the shadows that shaped it. And yet, as much as predators ruled in fear, they also passed into silence in time. Their bones, too, sank into rivers, their teeth lodged in soils, their shadows fading into extinction. They shaped the forest while present, but the forest outlasted them, as it outlasts all things. Still, their necessity lingers, written into the balance of every ecosystem to follow, reminders that even destruction has its place in creation. And so, beneath the humid canopy, the predators prowled not as outliers but as caretakers, unknowing, unseen, yet essential. The shadows they cast were not only threats, but corrections, reminders that forests breathe not in abundance alone but in the harmony of cycles. And yet, if even shadows were necessary, if every loss nourished another beginning, then what of those moments when entropy took everything, not just some, when whole forests were compelled to fall, consumed by time's deeper hunger? The predator's strike may bring one life to an end, but endings in the forest do not belong to hunters alone. Time itself stalks the canopy in quieter ways. Branches sag and crack. Leaves, once green, curl into brittle fragments. Bodies heavier than any carnivore's appetite collapse into the undergrowth. Spores drift upward only to settle lifeless among shadows. Entropy, the slow unraveling of all forms, was the most patient hunter of all. Yet entropy did not arrive as a thief. It arrived as a composer. In the breakdown of each form, from the smallest spore to the tallest branch, lay the raw ingredients for tomorrow. Nothing in the canopy, or in the soil beneath, was truly erased. Instead, it was composed into new arrangements, folded back into the green architecture of life. Picture the canopy at its height. Layers of green stacked toward the humid sky, branches wide, leaves endless. Then wait. Decades pass, storms collect. A limb cracks, falls with quiet thunder to the forest floor. From above, it seems an ending. But beneath, fungi bloom instantly into networks, weaving through wood, dissolving rigid forms into softness. Termites invade, beetles bore, microbes seep. The forest recognizes no end without subsequent beginning. Within seasons, that limb is no longer a branch but soil, feeding roots, feeding leaves that strain upward once again. Entropy here is not erasure but transformation, not silence but continuation. The same happens across all scales. Dinosaurs, once immense and moving like living monuments, fell, their colossal frames returning to cycles as flesh softened, as bone broke, as marrow found its way into Earth's chemistry. For days or weeks, the carcass may have been a feast for smaller predators, scavengers, insects. But in larger spans, those remains became unremarkable matter beneath the roots, minerals, carbon, nutrients. The cathedral of the canopy built itself on such returns. Green was fed by loss. Entropy shaped even the air. Leaves, each breath capturing carbon and releasing oxygen, withered in their time. They tumbled from branches like rain, carpeting the soil, composting into new energy. What began as breath eventually became ground, and what became ground was lifted again into breath. Nothing drifted away without purpose. Nothing was waste. Scientists uncover these transformations in stone records, fossilized wood, mineralized bone, isotopic traces preserved from decayed matter. In thin slices of petrified stems, we see not death, but the permanence of entropy's artistry. It is not destruction but arrangement, captured and frozen in forms we can still study. Entropy left signatures not only in the soil but in the very record we now call geology. Deep time is layered with entropy's handwriting. Perhaps, then, life never truly dies as we imagine. It composes itself differently each time, repurposed by streams and roots and air until what once seemed vanished becomes part of another breath, another leaf, another body. It is unsettling and strangely beautiful to realize we are always standing among endless rearrangements of what came before. Consider the canopy again. By day it grows resilient, generous. By night it moans softly in wind, waiting. But above, decay is already working. Spores that fail sink lifeless. Pollen that never finds a mate crumbles downwind. Branches dry and drop unseen. And yet none of this is wasted. Entropy gathers every fragment, rethreads them into the web, recycles dynamism into stillness and back again. The canopy is not eternal because it resists entropy. The canopy is eternal because it is built on entropy. What, then, do we make of endings? Are they truly endings, or simply transitions written too slowly for us to notice? Maybe there is no such thing as waste in the deep structure of nature. Maybe entropy is not the closing of a page, but the writing of another, inked invisibly across soil, across air, across stone. And so, as branches decay and spores wither, and as bodies fall, we watch not an erasure but a recomposition. The silence left by absence is filled swiftly with presence. The gaps left by loss are seized by new beginnings. Entropy in the canopy was not only inevitable, it was essential. And yet, if even decay feeds continuation, if nothing is truly erased but only rewritten, then what might the whole forest look like when seen not from within, but from the skies above, as one vast organism, canopies shifting like seas, renewal shimmering across its green expanse? From within the canopy, life appeared as fragments. A fallen branch here, a moving shadow there, leaves unfurling and withering in endless succession. But imagine rising above that world, borne on the wings of a bird-like dinosaur, climbing into humid skies. From such a vantage, the forest no longer felt like countless individual trees and bodies, but a single vast surface, a living ocean of green undulating across the land. What seemed separate at ground level revealed itself as unity. The canopy swayed not as isolated crowns but as a collective tide, a breathing presence that stretched beyond the horizon. Seen from above, the streams that carved valleys glistened like veins threading through a body. Rivers shimmered in curves, feeding deltas that expanded outward, nourishing the forest even as they carried its memory away. Breaks in the canopy revealed lagoons, patches of shimmering water cupped by the green embrace. Herds moved below, tiny from such height, drifting across open clearings like cells flowing through lifeblood, each step a contribution to the organism's motion. The forest, from this vantage, was no longer setting, it was being. A single body, composed of countless parts. It is humbling to imagine how creatures of that world might have perceived such vistas. Early feathered dinosaurs, gliding through air currents, may not have grasped the grand geometry, yet their bodies lived it. Each wing beat carried them over layers of green, across valleys where the canopies curled in rolling waves. Perhaps they sensed, if not in thought then in presence, that everything below pulsed together, that the forest was not backdrop, but home woven as one. To modern eyes, there is something almost mystical here. We look at fossils of wings, bones lightened by air, and realize these creatures glimpsed patterns inaccessible to the grounded giants. A sauropod may have lived among the trees, shaping paths through their trunks, but only the gliders and small-boned flyers saw the canopy's unity. Is it possible the forest itself was designed to be understood only when seen from above, as though asking the skies to reveal its wholeness? Science, too, supports this impression of unity. Oxygen exhaled by countless leaves rose and mingled, indistinguishable but inseparable. Moisture released into the sky condensed into clouds that returned as rain, nourishing not individuals but the entirety. Even predator and prey, seen from this height, were less opposites than currents in the same flow, checks and balances maintaining the stability of the whole. What seems conflict up close is harmony when viewed as pattern. And perhaps this is the deepest truth of the forest. Everything fed everything, everything depended on everything, no part fully alone. The rivers carried nutrients downward. The soil recycled endings into beginnings. The canopy spread breath into the atmosphere. The insects carried spores and song across great distances. Even extinction itself, sudden or slow, returned resources to cycles that gave rise to new life. It was one bewildering constellation of processes, each insignificant by itself, yet unstoppable when joined together. From above, entropy too lost its finality. A fallen tree was no tragedy in the larger shape, but a stroke in the pattern, part of the movement that maintained continuity. Renewal did not appear as interruption but as design. What we see as endings dissolve entirely when sight expands beyond the immediate. From the height of a glider's wingspan, everything below was part of the same breath, inhaling and exhaling, moving through time as one organism too vast to be contained by simple definition. The fossil record does not give us photographs of these vistas, only traces. Pollen layers indicating skies that bore particles across miles. Isotopes in ancient raindrops preserved within minerals. Imprints in rock that show where canopies once thickened into continuous mats. And yet, from these fragments we sense a truth akin to poetry, that forests are more than the sum of their trees. Perhaps they always were great organisms, connecting life vertically and horizontally, across scales too complex to notice until one can soar above them. To watch the Jurassic canopy from the air would be to watch memory itself alive, endlessly reshaping, never still for more than a heartbeat. We think of time as linear, yet from above, it becomes a landscape of layers breathing together, green waves shifting like a patient sea. Perhaps the greatest truth of forests lies in this perspective, that no matter the fragment we hold in hand, a fossil, a leaf turned in light, it is only one part of a whole whose immensity survives even extinction. And yet, if even the sky revealed the forest as a single living body, then what secrets must lie waiting in the stone itself, where roots pressed downward and would become mineral, carrying entire dialogues written not in sound or breath, but in the chemistry of eternity? From the sky, the forest appeared as one breathing body. But beneath that tapestry of green, another archive was being written in secret. Most of the fossils we hold in museums or cradle in our palms are bones. The skeletons of giants, the teeth of predators, the imprints of shells. Yet bones were not the only stories buried by time. The forest itself, in its silence, left behind its own kind of record. Trees fossilized, wood petrified. Roots left their whispered marks in stone. These are fossils not of motion, but of stillness. Not of animals fleeing or falling, but of patience, of growth, of lives that stretched upward toward the sky for centuries before being folded into eternity. Petrified wood is perhaps the most haunting of these transformations. In life, sap coursed through vessels, water rose through capillaries, sunlight was converted into breath. In death, when fallen logs were quickly buried by sediment or ash, minerals quietly seeped in, filling the cells, infiltrating spaces once alive with flow. Grain by grain, molecule by molecule, the organic matter gave way, replaced by quartz, chalcedony, or opal. In time, the tree became stone, yet not ordinary stone. Its body was preserved in extraordinary detail. Growth rings visible, vessels intact, cellular architecture eternally recorded. To look closely is to see how patience itself becomes visible. The tree, in its silence, taught minerals how to remember. These records are chemical dialogues across ages. Within the structure of petrified wood, isotopes linger, traces of the atmosphere that once surrounded the canopy, whispers of the soil's mineral composition, even suggestions of the climate that pressed down upon those forests. To the untrained eye, these fossils are beautiful stones, their polished surfaces gleaming with colors unnatural to living wood. Reds, blues, greens, swirls like galaxies encased. But to the scientist's gaze, they are codes written by time, maps of conditions that shaped not just a single tree, but entire ecosystems. Wood, transmuted into stone, preserves the dialogue between soil and sky. In this sense, petrified forests are not ruins. They are technofossils of nature itself, archives produced without conscious design, yet more enduring than any library built by human hands. They remind us that the planet has long been recording its own autobiography, etched into matter with no audience in mind but eternity. We may marvel at bones because they tell of lives that moved and hunted. Yet wood, just as fragile in life, has offered us a quieter gift, a testament of growth, of stillness, of seasons written in concentric rings that circle endlessly around a vanished heart. When we walk among fossilized logs today, some stretching longer than houses, lying silent in desert beds, it is easy to imagine them as monuments. But they are not monuments. They are continuations. The tree's body returned to the earth, But in doing so, it left behind a bridge. We touch it and feel not only the texture of stone, but the ghost of sap that once flowed beneath our fingers, the soft flecks of wood that once bent in the wind. Fossils of forests remind us that presence does not vanish. It only changes form. Perhaps this is the message of the rooted world. Patience is the greatest preserver. A tree grows slowly, ring upon ring added in increments invisible to observation. When it dies, replacement occurs slowly, minerals infiltrating one pore at a time until the transformation is complete. Time, in this scale, is a sculptor not of dramatic gestures but of infinite repetition, carving memory into permanence without rush. And if trees have left us these silent technofossils, what other dialogues might still be hidden in stone? Could the chemistry of petrified roots tell us how rainfall shifted, how rivers whispered through those ancient soils, how volcanoes once poisoned or nourished the ground? Within these archives, memory is written not in words or stories, but in trace elements, in silicate growth, in the stubborn endurance of mineral taking the place of something once alive. The rooted world reminds us that the forest was never temporary. Not fully. Pieces of it live still, not merely in distant echoes of lineages like the ginkgo, but in bodies transfigured into stone. We read them today across desert landscapes where no tree now grows, and yet, in those petrified logs, we stand within vanished forests again. And yet, if trees themselves became stone records of their era, carrying their silent dialogues across millions of years, what of the seas that kissed these shores, where forests met coastlines of warmth and tide? What memories might have been written into the meeting places between land and water? Beyond the rooted world of stone-turned forest, the canopy stretched outward until it met another dominion, the seas. In the Jurassic, vast inland waters spread across continents, warm and shallow, pressing their tides into low valleys, drawing coastlines into the heart of green dominions. Here, the forests kissed the ocean's edge, and what seemed separate land, sea, air, blurred into one shifting whole. The heat of those waters rose into the atmosphere, thickening humidity until the air itself seemed liquid, steamy, alive. The forest dripped under this breath, and weather became sculptor, carving, nourishing, and sometimes drowning entire landscapes. Imagine walking where tree roots sink into the damp margins of such a shore. Waves lap softly against fallen trunks, their spray mingling with spores drifting down from above. Ferns cluster tightly along the waterline, their fronds arching over tidal pools alive with invertebrates. Dinosaurs tread here too, not indifferent to sea or salt. Some wandered coastal plains in search of vegetation flushed by nutrient-rich floods, their footsteps pressing into wet mud alongside marks of crabs or shells. In these margins, the worlds of ocean and forest touched, their cycles intertwining into something greater. The humid heat of this union created ecosystems both abundant and precarious. Warm seas fueled thick clouds. Rainfall poured into valleys, swelling rivers that braided into floodplains. Some seasons, life flourished beyond imagination. Forests green in endless repetition, ferns unfolding with vigor, insects patrolling humid skies. Other seasons brought collapse. Storms rising suddenly, shorelines shifting, brackish floods drowning roots that could not endure salt. The margin between land and ocean was memory written in tides, eternally shifting, rarely secure. And yet, these seas were older than the forests that bent toward them. Oceans are deeper archives, their tides flowing in rhythms shaped long before dinosaurs stirred the fern thickets. By touching the seas, the forests were not only receiving nourishment, but connecting to something far more ancient than themselves. The air they breathed carried water vapor lifted from oceans older than land, older than conifers, older even than the ginkgo who endured. Perhaps this touching of domains was not just ecology, but communion, a reminder that all life, no matter how rooted, still drew breath from the sea. Inland seas, swollen by greenhouse warmth, created mosaics of landscapes. Where water pressed furthest inland, coral reefs flourished, thriving communities of silent builders who laid down calcium skeletons that still rise in limestone today. Dinosaurs may have grazed not far from these shorelines, drinking where ferns gave way to beach, unaware that below the waves, other architects were shaping stone that would outlast them all. The reefs, like the forests, wrote memory in solid form. Their cycles, too, belonged to time's archive. Perhaps to stand in such a place was to feel everything woven together. Forests exhaling into sky, seas breathing clouds that drifted inland, rivers carrying those waters back toward the ocean. All cycles connected, all pieces feeding into a whole. It was a greenhouse world, but it was also a water world, each breath saturated with the memory of tides. From a scientific view, we see this in oxygen isotopes locked within shells buried in ancient seabeds. They reveal temperatures warm and humid, climates swollen with moisture. Fossil pollen preserved in coastal clays tells us forests leaned close to the water, their spores washing into seas. These archives, stone mixing land with wave, remind us that the worlds of forest and ocean were never separate in truth. Each life grew because another sustained. If rivers were archivists of land, the seas were archivists of the planet's body itself, recording endlessly in sediment the rise and fall of climates, the composition of air, the shifting of continents. Forests may have ruled above, but the seas held deeper authority, older and wider. Together they formed a dialogue, ferns bending over brine, reptiles wandering close to tide, faults of crust submerging entire landscapes beneath warm waves. And yet imagine dusk along such a place, humidity hanging heavy, the last light glinting pink and gold across shallow ripples. A herd of herbivores lowers their necks to drink, leaving ripples that scatter into wider circles. Insects hover, catching the glow. Behind them, the forest breathes out into the damp night, and in the distance, the sea breathes in, its rhythm older still. In that moment, the line between land and water dissolves into continuity, as if the whole planet, for one heartbeat, sighs together. And yet, if shorelines could carry forests into oceans and oceans into forests, blurring the edges of worlds, then what other archives might lie hidden in smaller vessels still, in drops of resin that captured creatures in air, storing time not in waves or stone, but within amber's golden silence. Where seas recorded in sediment and forests etched memory into stone, another kind of archive formed quietly on the trunks of trees themselves. Not in vast rivers, not in valleys carved with echoes, but in drops. Small, glistening, resinous drops. They dripped slowly from conifers and cycads, thick with sap, golden in sunlight, and unnoticed by most who brushed past them. But within these tiny spheres of resin, something remarkable happened. They became prisons of time. Insects, light as whispers, crawled across resin and were caught. A spore drifting down a beam of light fell into its stickiness and sank. Even fragments of air, oxygen, carbon, traces of ancient atmosphere, became trapped, sealed away beyond release. What seemed insignificant in its moment grew profound across millions of years. Resin hardened, deepened in color, lost its stickiness, and transformed into amber. And within that amber, worlds of memory waited, perfectly preserved. Amber fossils are unlike the silent outlines of bone pressed into stone. They are snapshots, windows, sometimes unbearably precise. A dragonfly's wing, its delicate veins still visible. A tiny spider midstep, frozen in forever motion. Pollen grains clinging to a trapped insect's body, as if still prepared to be carried onward. Through amber, we do not meet only the idea of life, we meet its faces. We glimpse fragile beings as they truly once were. And because amber holds atmosphere itself, it holds whispers of Jurassic breath. Tiny air bubbles capture chemical compositions that let us imagine the world's climate as if inhaled directly from the past. Ratios of carbon, traces of oxygen. They murmur to us of greenhouses and forests, rains and seasons long dissolved. In this way, amber contains not only body but breath, not only the living but the air that gave them life. To hold amber in your hand today is to cradle a paradox. It is light, glowing softly, precious and delicate. Yet within its glow lies enormous weight, not in mass, but in meaning. Each golden bead is a time capsule billions of hours old. Nights came and went. Forests fell and flourished again. Giants' footsteps were pressed into mud, washed away, and turned to stone. Volcanoes roared, seas rose and withdrew. And still that drop of cured resin stayed, holding its secrets against the erosion of ages until it reached our hands. What haunts us most, perhaps, is scale. Dinosaurs left skeletons longer than houses. Forests left petrified trunks heavier than stone. And yet amber holds truths in fragments smaller than fingernails. A gnat, a beetle, a grain of pollen. The tiniest archives survived when so much greater was lost. Could it be that memory favors the delicate over the immense? That what persists across time is not always what ruled in life, but what slipped by unnoticed, sealed into silence? Philosophically, amber asks us to reconsider what it means to preserve. Stone preserves the outlines of motion. Soil recycles endings into beginnings. Resin preserves intimacy. A breath, a pause, the captured stillness of a creature that never had a name. Its beauty lies in incompleteness. Amber does not tell the whole story. It reveals moments, single instants, impossibly exact, suspended forever. And sometimes, perhaps, a moment can reveal more than an age. When light shines through amber, it illuminates more than inclusions. It reveals a tenderness in the act of remembering. Nature preserved these fragments not through intention, but through accident. No forest planned a library. No tree intended to archive breath. And yet here they are, golden beads carrying secrets into the long corridors of time. Perhaps memory itself is often accidental. Not chosen, but stumbled upon, hidden in corners until rediscovery. And what does it mean for us, then, that we peer into these glowing windows? What does it mean that we can see the curve of an antenna, the grain of a leg, the shape of a wing still folded? Could there be something, even now, preserved that we have not yet discovered? Deeper stories trapped unseen in amber we have yet to unearth? The forests once dripped with these archives, forgotten beneath soil and stone. Some shattered, some eroded, some dissolved without witness. But a fortunate few survived to our present, still transparent, still waiting to be held to the light. And in them we see not violence, not decay, but the strange patience of memory. And yet, if time can be suspended so perfectly in golden resin, what other traces might remain imprinted underfoot, pressed not into glowing drops, but into mud hardened by the weight of giants? What fleeting gestures might still echo as footprints turn to stone? If amber preserves moments in golden stillness, then the ground itself carries another kind of archive, one written in weight, in contact, in motion. Tracks, footsteps pressed into soft clay, hardened by chance, buried beneath the silence of centuries, only to emerge again in hours. They are not bodies. They are not bones. They are brief gestures turned permanent. Nothing more than contact between skin and soil, yet across time, they transcend into memory etched upon the planet. A herd moved once across a floodplain, water lapping at their ankles, mud soft from a receding storm, their feet pressed down, pushing aside silt, shaping small impressions that would normally dissolve with the next rain. But conditions aligned. Sediment settled quickly, sealing those depressions beneath fresh layers. And so what was fleeting became durable. This is the quiet alchemy of trace fossils. They are not what lived, but where life happened. They are shadows of motion held long enough to teach us that even the briefest moments can matter if preserved. There are predator tracks, two solitary impressions winding around what may once have been a nesting place. Sharp toes gouging into clay, circling, pausing, moving on. Were they hunting, guarding, searching? We cannot know. These traces are both revealing and elusive, their silence greater than their clarity. For every print we find, there are infinite thoughts withheld, behaviors gone unknown, entire stories condensed into shallow marks. Perhaps that is their gift. They remind us that memory retains the fact of presence while forgetting the fullness of experience. And yet, to see such tracks today is to feel an uncanny intimacy. Bones remind us of death, of creatures long gone. But footprints remind us of life, of movement, of a moment when the ground felt the press of something immense, something breathing. To place your hand against one is to touch almost directly the path of a being who once lived, as though reaching across millions of years. There is tenderness in that, a paradox of closeness across unfathomable time. Scientists study these impressions carefully. The depth of a track reveals weight. The spacing of strides reveals speed. Minute shifts of sediment within the print can even hint at the texture of skin or the way claws curved upon contact. Isotopes from minerals in surrounding layers tell us whether it was humid or dry, whether the river was swelling or retreating. Footsteps in the dust thus become more than shapes. They become narratives, not complete, but suggestive, fragments that allow us to reconstruct the faint outlines of vanished days. And yet, for all they reveal, they remain fragile. Many tracks eroded before they could harden. Others were buried so deeply they may never resurface. For each set we find across open flats or quarried quarries, countless more have dissolved into nothing. Memory pressed into earth, then erased by it. The archive of footprints is partial, like the amber record, like the fossil beds, like time itself, defined as much by absence as by survival. Still, what lives in these traces matters beyond their rarity. They prove that history is not only grand and sweeping, entire species, entire climates, but also immediate. A footprint is a step, a pause, an act. A brief grazing visit to a riverbank. A startled dash. A herd clustering closely, hooves or claws muddied together as they crossed. What we read in hardened earth is not just biology but being. Not just the what of life, but the when. For to leave a footprint is to declare, however briefly, I was here. Perhaps we are haunted by them because the same will be true of us. Our marks today, roads and buildings and even the soft compressions of our own feet within sand, may or may not endure. Some may be erased. Some may petrify. Some may be read by eyes that know nothing of us. Footsteps are reminders that presence is transient. But sometimes, through patience and chance, presence can echo far longer than expected. The forests, the rivers, the seas, all held their archives. But the footprints pressed into clay are unique. They are moments fossilized as much in gesture as in matter. They are the closest thing we have to memory as an act, transformed into stone. Each track a word in a language time has scattered but not wholly destroyed. And yet, if such fleeting movements can endure in earth, transformed into permanence, what of the invisible trails recorded not in tracks but in chemistry itself? Isotopic whispers hidden within fossils and sediments, carrying memories of air, rainfall, and atmosphere still waiting for us to read. The footprints pressed into dust remind us of steps. But what of the steps of climate itself? The slow shifts not seen in motion but recorded in silence, in matter so small it escapes the eye. Beneath the surface of fossils, in bones and leaves transformed into stone, there lies another kind of memory. Not the curve of a claw, nor the outline of a leaf, but isotopes. The subtle arrangements of atoms, the ratios of carbon to oxygen, the delicate partitions of elements that whisper what rainfall once fell, what drought once lingered, and what air once pressed its presence upon the land. These are the invisible archives, voices buried in chemistry, still speaking when all else has fallen silent. An isotope is not a fossil in the way we usually imagine. It does not preserve form. It preserves condition. Carbon isotopes cling to the tissues of plants, reflecting how much sunlight they captured, how much carbon dioxide filled the atmosphere when they lived. Oxygen isotopes embed themselves in bone and shell, their ratios shifting with temperature and rainfall, recording subtle variations in climate long extinct. To look at a fossilized leaf is to see a shadow of shape. To study its isotopes is to feel the breath of the skies that moved above it, the cycle of water that sustained or starved it. Scientists, with tools precise enough to measure these atomic fingerprints, read them now like diaries. In their patterns they uncover hidden chapters, droughts that stretched farther than fossils alone suggest, wet periods when floodplains bloomed beyond estimation, sudden shifts when volcanoes darkened skies or currents altered winds. Each ratio carries a trace of what once was, each fragment a note in the long, patient symphony of the planet. The forest, silent through extinction, rewrites its own story in chemistry underground. And these whispers matter more than we often realize. Predator's bone may tell us its size. A set of tracks may tell us how it moved. But isotopes in those same bones tell us what landscapes it walked through, what water it drank, what air it breathed. A fossil without isotopes is a shape. With isotopes, it becomes a climate, a world. The isotopic library does not reveal individuals. It reveals systems, the flows of carbon, oxygen, nitrogen across forests and seas, across millions of years. Through them, we see not just fossils of life, but the breath of an entire planet. It is strange to think that worlds can vanish so completely, yet their air, their sunlight, their rainfall remain encrypted in chemical patterns within stone. The trees that once rose in endless cathedrals, the rivers that meandered across fertile plains, the humid skies above the inland seas, all persist not only in memory or imagination, but in the isotopic signals held within fossils resting quietly in our hands. They speak not with sound but with balance, with ratios, with whispers so soft they require machines to decode. Yet once heard, they remind us that the Earth never fully forgets itself. Perhaps isotopes are the closest we come to the planet's inner voice. Unlike amber, which shows us instants, or footprints, which show us gestures, isotopes show us conditions that stretched beyond instant or gesture into the endless background, the kind of vast atmospheres and cycles within which all other memories unfolded. They are less like words and more like breath. Unremarkable while present, essential in function, and only missed when gone. There is humility in such recognition. For all our fascination with bones and fossils, the deepest truths about the Jurassic may not come from forms at all but from these invisible markers. They reveal the rains that once nourished ferns, the droughts that tested herds, the atmospheric shifts that allowed giants to breathe in abundance. They tell us that life is not only shaped by its own hungers and choices, but equally by the vast chemistry of air and water coursing unseen around it. And perhaps, when we listen long enough to these whispers, we begin to realize that the beauty of memory lies less in the clarity of single stories and more in the mosaic of small, overlapping fragments. A footprint here, a pollen grain there, an isotope locked in stone. None of them whole, yet all of them pieces. Together they converge into something greater, an unfinished but continuous chorus. So when we speak of extinct forests and vanished skies, we are not merely imagining. We are reconstructing from whispers that persist beneath silence. In this way, we become part of the memory ourselves. By listening with care, we help the forest to keep speaking, long beyond its own age. And yet, if isotopes can reveal the hidden music of climates in such fragments, what story emerges when climates themselves begin to falter, when stability slips away and forests decline? What does it mean to carry whispers of abundance into echoes of loss? No forest stands immortal. Even those that seem eternal, stretching endlessly toward drifting suns and humid skies, surrender in time. The forests of the Jurassic were no exception. For millions of years they flourished, canopies layered like vast green cathedrals, their breath shaping climates, their roots feeding giants. And yet, slowly, imperceptibly at first, decline began to weave its way into the fabric of abundance. The seas shifted, fires burned, climate cycles altered their balance. The canopy thinned, patch by patch, a farewell written not in sudden collapse but in quiet unraveling. What does it mean for an ecosystem to fade, to lose its grandeur without knowing it will end? We imagine decline in dramatic tones. Storms, droughts, extinctions like sharp crashes in the flow of time. But often it is subtler. A change in rainfall, rivers shifting their courses, shorelines inching further inland with each swollen tide. The forest does not know it is fading. A tree falls, but ferns still rise. A herd wanders further for food, but smaller things adapt. Life continues, even as greatness diminishes, until one day what felt eternal has shrunk into scarcity. From fossils and isotopes we read these patterns. Pines once common vanish from the record, replaced by different leaves, better suited for drier winds. Fire layers emerge in stone, black impressions where forests smoldered, only to regrow thinner, less towering. Floodplains once dense with spores show sudden gaps. Pollen missing where whole plant species slipped away. Decline is not absence alone. It is the thinning of diversity, the narrowing of abundance, the quiet dimming of sound in what was once a symphony. And still, even in loss, cycles continued. Each fallen species yielded to another. Each collapse allowed smaller things to grow. Early flowering plants began their long introduction during these shifting ages, finding opportunities in gaps left behind. Mammals, small and unseen in the shadows, adapted quickly when forests fragmented. If giants left silence, others filled it. Decline, in this sense, is less obliteration than change of rhythm, the green dominion trading grandeur for resilience, expanse for transformation. Perhaps the saddest truth is that no forest can sense its own ending. The canopy did not know it was thinning. The roots did not mourn their own retreat. From within, life continues as if eternity is still possible. It is only from the perspective of time that decline becomes visible, that the forest becomes an echo of itself. And in this way, the Jurassic canopy reminds us of our own moment, how easily change feels hidden beneath continuity, how often we mistake persistence for permanence. The decline did not arrive everywhere at once. In some valleys, forests persisted for centuries, lush and humming. In others, cycles of drought and flood stripped foliage bare, leaving dust where once ferns reached skyward. Volcanoes layered ash over regions, forcing renewal at a slower pace. The seas claimed more land, drowning coastlines and driving forests away from familiar ground. What had once been stable swathes of green became patchworks, broken, thinner, marked by absence. And yet decline is not only loss but memory too. Petrified forests, fire-scorched soils, isotopic signatures in sediment. All are echoes of a transition, part of the larger record of how ecosystems ebb and return. In their thinning, Jurassic forests wrote lessons for the next great ages, lessons preserved in chemistry, in silence, in rearrangements of life that fed what came after. To imagine walking through one of these fading forests is to enter a space both alive and diminished. The canopy no longer closes entirely overhead. Sunlight pierces where once shadows ruled. Fewer calls resound at dusk. More of the undergrowth lies bare. Yet even here, spores still rise, birds and small feathered hunters still call. Water still circulates beneath roots. Life, patient beyond grandeur, continues in forms less obvious than before. So how do ecosystems farewell their own presence? Gently, quietly, without awareness of farewell. The forest that declines does not declare itself an ending. It continues as best it can, transforming memories into matter for another cycle, another age. Perhaps it is only we, looking back, who call this decline. To the forest itself, it was simply being, simply breathing until one day it was gone. And yet, if entire canopies can thin and vanish without ever knowing their grandeur has slipped away, then what might it mean for those remnants preserved under ash and soot, the burned layers frozen in stone, waiting to remind us that even great forests end in silence? Decline arrived quietly for many forests, but not all endings were gentle. Sometimes time itself closed the canopy not with drought or thinning, but with fire. Volcanoes exhaled again, their breath spreading ash and soot across vast valleys, darkening the air until daylight dimmed into twilight. Where once leaves stretched toward the humid sky, gray descended, choking roots, suffocating branches, silencing the insect choirs that once filled the dusk. The ashen canopy was neither slow nor forgiving. It fell quickly, blanketing entire ecosystems beneath a weight they could not outlast. Close your eyes and imagine it. Forests alive with song one moment, the air turning acrid the next. Ash drifting through shafts of light until light itself was strangled. Dinosaurs lifted their heads, bewildered, their lungs filling with irritation fine as powder. Ferns bent under weight they were not designed to bear. Resin burned not golden but black, releasing into air what it had held. Rain fell dark, mixing with soot to make rivers thick and stifled. Life tried to breathe, But the air, for a time, offered nothing back. And then silence. A silence thick enough that no wing beat could disturb it. No call could break it. The canopies, once green cathedrals, became vast graveyards of trunks buried under layers of powder. In hours or days, what had taken centuries till we fell into collapse. Fires consumed swathes of undergrowth, leaving charcoal impressions that still whisper to us from rock layers. Trees, half turned to stone by sudden burial, remained locked where they fell. The forests did not fade here. They were sealed. To us, these layers are unmistakable. Thick black bands in cliffs, lines of soot pressed between sediments of red and gray. They read like scars written into the Earth's manuscript, telling of catastrophes so immense they needed no words, only residue. In those darkened bands, scientists find isotopes shifted by eruption, carbon spiked by burning, fragments of wood half-charred and then turned mineral. They speak of extinction not in theory, but in presence. Beneath our fields and rivers, under our modern forests and plains, these layers remain hidden, silent witnesses of what was buried. And yet, as with fire before, destruction carried renewal within it. Ash, heavy with minerals from the depths, became fertile soil once rain returned. Blackened ground sprouted green again, first small ferns, then thicker growths that reclaimed the silence with patience. In time, forests rose once more over what had fallen, unaware of the graves below. The ferns that bent beneath the ash eventually sprouted anew, their spores carried by winds into blankened fields. The ashen canopy did not remain forever barren but became a foundation for the green of tomorrow. Loss became renewal again, as though the earth itself insisted that nothing, not even catastrophe, could silence it permanently. Still, there is something haunting in knowing that entire forests lie beneath us, not vanished fully, but folded under today's landscapes. Fields where crops grow, hillsides blooming in spring, valleys echoing with birdsong. In many of these, deep below, sleeps an older silence, layered in soot. Catastrophes once so total now rest disguised under life. Every meadow, every grove, stands atop not just soil but also memory. And perhaps this is why we return to these buried archives with such reverence. When we split stone and uncover charcoal layers, when we polish fragments of ash-fused wood, we touch not just death but continuity. We see clearly that endings need not be final, that renewal is the law even after silence. Yet the ash reminds us, too, of fragility, that what takes eons to weave can be undone in days by fire, by sky, by forces indifferent to beauty. To us, it may feel overwhelming, but to the planet it is rhythm. Forests burn, forests regrow, cycles repeat. What we call catastrophe, the planet calls transition. The ashen canopy was terrible but also necessary, recycling, rebalancing, making space for seeds of change. Without such interruptions, perhaps new life would never have found its path. And yet, if catastrophes can remake forests so utterly, layering history beneath silence, what becomes of those layers as time deepens further? What traces linger when silence has folded not once or twice, but countless times, burying memory beneath memory? Deeper still, every forest eventually becomes silence. What towers must tumble. What sings must one day fall quiet. In the Jurassic, as in every age, the canopies that once rose like living cathedrals declined into stillness. Trunks collapsed into hollows, branches grew heavy and broke, leaves fell and decayed. The insect choirs lessened, the thrum of wings faded, the calls of giants grew fewer as time rearranged its balances. Silence crept downward into the forests until what once dominated the horizon became a memory written only beneath the ground. But silence here was not absence. It was transformation, a shift of voice from sound into matter, from presence into endurance. To imagine a forest reduced to silence is not to picture emptiness, but continuation in another form. Each fallen tree folded into soil, feeding mycelial threads that spread invisibly through the dark. Fungi consumed wood, turned it soft, recycled it into nourishment. Roots of younger plants drank from that nourishment, lifting it upward again into fresh green. The silence was not void. It was the forest dispersing itself into new arrangements. The canopy continued, though no longer in grand trunks, but in nutrients, in atoms, in quiet potential waiting to rise again. Bones of giants sank into this silence too. Where once their heavy steps stirred undergrowth, their bodies dissolved, bones mineralized, songs gone mute. Yet stone picked up where voices left off. Fossils formed, silent testimonies to lives too immense to vanish without residue. A femur turned to rock here, a tooth carried downstream there. Silence is selective. It does not erase everything all at once. It leaves fragments, scattered for memory to pick up again later, scattered like words across pages torn from larger books. Science shows us how silence is not the end but a phase. Soils enriched with ancient carbon still bear isotopic fingerprints of vanished forests. Petrified trunks remain, cells intact but transmuted into quartz and chalcedony. Charcoal fragments, delicate as paper, reveal fires that blackened canopies long forgotten. In these transformations, silence teaches us that nothing vanishes fully. The forest is still with us, but now it speaks with stone instead of song, with carbon traces instead of living leaves. It is memory turned chemical. And perhaps this is what draws us most deeply. Silence itself becomes a voice, a silence that holds weight, that grounds the present, reminding us that our own forests, our own green spaces, rest atop the transformed silence of countless others. Walk across a meadow, and you tread on the echoes of prior canopies, compressed into soil, transfigured into nourishment for grasses, flowers, and roots that now rise where cycads once stood. The silence of the past lies directly beneath us, not empty, never hollow, always waiting. But silence, too, can be haunting. A forest falling quiet means more than its physical dispersal. It is also the fading of memory too vast to capture fully. The canopy's voices are gone, and though fossils whisper, they whisper incompletely. What was once lush and filled with song is reduced to fragments. Roots becoming carbon, trunks becoming soil, spores vanishing entirely. The silence tells us that memory itself is partial, that what we know of the past will always be incomplete, always filled with gaps. Perhaps silence preserves not everything, but enough. Enough to remind us of what was possible, enough to carry forward the continuity of green. To ask what becomes of a forest once reduced to soil is to examine the paradox of time itself. On one level, the forest is gone. The trunks no longer shade, the songs no longer rise, the creatures no longer move within them. And yet, on another, the forest becomes the soil, the roots, the stone, the very breath of air, cycling quietly through every form that follows. Perhaps there is no true disappearance, but only dispersal and rearrangement, memory taking new shapes. And so the great Jurassic forests became silence. Their roots, their leaves, their voices dissolved into ground and stone. But silence, in truth, is another kind of music. It is not absence, but a softer presence, one that does not demand attention but invites reflection. A presence we walk upon, we inhale, we carry without knowing. Each handful of soil today contains within it uncountable stories of forests long faded. Each breath draws atoms once exhaled by trees that shaded dinosaurs. Silence speaks quietly, but it speaks still. And yet, if every forest eventually becomes this transformation into soil and silence, then what is it like to wander those labyrinths of time itself? To recognize that each layer, each fossil, each grain of earth leads us further into puzzles without endings? To walk through the Jurassic forest, even in imagination, is to wander not only among trees and shadows, but into something greater, a labyrinth of time. Each trunk, each fossil, each trace of chemistry whispers fragments of a story, yet never the whole. Every discovery feels like a path, inviting us forward, but behind that single path lie 1,000 more, hidden, untraceable, unreachable. Deep time is no straight road. It is a labyrinth, endless, recursive, always leading inward, never solved. The only way forward is to keep walking, to accept that certainty remains out of reach. Consider a single fossil leaf pressed into stone. Its shape is clear, delicate veins fanned like maps of sunlight caught millions of years ago. From it, we can measure the conditions of growth, perhaps infer the climate it once breathed. A clue. And yet, what of the forest around it, the tree from which it fell, the exact day it detached and settled into mud? These, the stone cannot reveal. For every answer uncovered, 1,000 questions bloom. Each is a doorway deeper into the labyrinth. And with every step, the realization grows. The forest cannot be reconstructed in full. It can only be glimpsed in fragments, half-seen turns of the maze. Isotopes offer another clue. Chemistry that opens windows into temperature, rainfall, the rhythm of climate strung across centuries. They speak softly, with ratios instead of shapes, with balances instead of voices. But here, too, the labyrinth hides its countless paths. Ratios shift, overlap, blur lines between possibilities. Was this forest struck by drought or by flood? Did carbon rise because of volcanic breath, or because the forest thinned itself away? The isotopes suggest, never confirm. They guide us forward, but always into chambers that branch again, endlessly. Perhaps that is the nature of this labyrinth. It is not meant to be solved. Labyrinths are not riddles with answers, but journeys with paths. To walk the green labyrinth of time is to surrender to incompleteness, to recognize that memory itself resists wholeness. Forests leave fossils, but not voices. Rivers leave sediments, but not motion. Amber preserves an insect, but not the air that carried its song. Each archive is a doorway, never a destination. To step inside is to know you will never reach the center, because the center does not exist. The labyrinth is made only of turns, only of motion. And yet it does not confuse. To walk through this maze is not to feel lost, but to feel invited. Each fragment pulls us forward, offering presence where absence could have been absolute. Perhaps part of the wonder lies in this, that even though the labyrinth stretches into immensity, so much has been preserved at all. That we can piece together even partial stories is itself astonishing, as if the forest wanted to leave just enough of its voice for us to follow faintly. We wonder then, do we walk this labyrinth alone? Or does the forest, in its way, walk with us? For by entering the puzzle, by asking of fossils and isotopes their quiet truths, we become part of the conversation. Memory requires both whisper and listener. Perhaps the labyrinth is not simply something the forest left behind, but something created anew each time we step deeper into its mystery. And maybe this is why labyrinths feel so ancient in our psyche. They are metaphors of time itself, spaces that circle back on themselves, chambers leading into more chambers, clear paths dissolving into uncertainty. The Jurassic forest embodied this. Its cycles of growth and entropy, its fires and floods, its fossils and silences. All of it carried us deeper, not toward conclusion, but toward greater mystery. To walk here is to realize that time itself is not a line we follow. It is a maze we inhabit, so we keep walking, not seeking resolution, but presence. Not searching for answers, but for moments of contact. A footprint here, a petrified trunk there, an amber drop glowing with an insect's wing. Each is a doorway, a passage, an indication that the labyrinth is alive with fragments. And though the puzzle is unsolvable, its walk is infinite. That is its gift. And yet, if the labyrinth of time shows us only fragments, never the whole, then what of memory that persists not only in stone but in living lineages, in leaves and seeds that still stir today, their designs unchanged, carriers of a past that never vanished fully? In the labyrinth of time, most paths lead us toward fragments, impressions half-preserved, whispers traced in isotopes, echoes folded beneath ash and soot. Yet sometimes memory takes two distinct, surprising forms. One is stone, fossils cupped in cliffs, leaves etched in shale, trunks preserved in quartz. The other is life itself, plants and lineages that endure across spans so vast they defy imagination. We are left to wonder, what remains clearer in telling the story of deep time? The fossil locked in limestone, permanent but silent, or the leaf that still unfurls today, alive and breathing, carrying its memory not in silence but in renewal? Fossils in stone embody stillness. They are pages torn from a book no longer written, frozen instants saved against the weight of entropy. A leaf pressed into shale cannot change. It speaks only of the day it lay down, the conditions it once knew, the shape it offered to light before it joined the soil. It remembers nothing that came after. Its memory is exquisite but static, a reminder of presence that ended, a fragment immortalized. When we gaze upon these fossils, we enter a conversation with silence, piecing together what was but can never be again. Seeds and surviving lineages, however, tell another story. They do not preserve a single moment. They preserve continuity. The ginkgo tree, still rooted in our present, is not a fossil in stone but a fossil in motion. Its fan-shaped leaves, unchanged across millions of years, are echoes brought into today's sunlight directly from the Jurassic canopy. Within its DNA is an archive far older than any library we could build, a record of adaptation, patience, and survival. Where fossils are stillness, seeds are music, melodies carried forward unbroken, changing only enough to ensure persistence. To hold a leaf of the ginkgo is to stand within the forest and the present at once, touching both absence and presence in the same breath. Which is the truer memory? Perhaps there is no clearer answer. Stone preserves what was. Seeds preserve what remains. Fossils offer us detail and finality, exact impressions, chemical signatures of vanished air. Living species offer us continuity, shapes and patterns that repeat across time, bridging past and present with breath. Perhaps memory is fullest only when both are considered together. The permanence of stone and the persistence of lineage, entangled, inseparable. Scientists read this duality with equal reverence. From fossils, isotopic traces reveal oxygen and carbon cycles. From living lineages, DNA whispers continuity, showing how genes endured despite extinction. Together, they tell a larger story than either could alone. Fossils teach us of absence, of mortality, of silence written into stone. Seeds teach us of presence, of resilience, of life's refusal to vanish even when worlds collapse. Both are archives, both are memory. Philosophically, this raises questions not only of forests but of ourselves. Do we remember better in stillness, in monuments, in records carved to last? Or in continuity, in stories retold, in habits passed from generation to generation, in lineages that alter but never end? Perhaps all memory carries this tension. The need to preserve the unchanging, and the need to let memory breathe by living forward. Imagine walking through the Jurassic forest with both understandings at once. Each fossil leaf falling onto the soil was potentially an archive of stone, waiting quietly to harden into permanence. Each seed that drifted in the breeze was potentially an echo of the future, carrying forward designs that might outlast entire epochs. The forest itself balanced these two forms of remembrance, one frozen, one fluid, both speaking softly into the labyrinth of time, both waiting to be read. To hold a fossil is to cradle silence. To hold a living ginkgo leaf is to cradle persistence. And perhaps it is not a choice between them. Both are memory, and both are incomplete without the other. The living seed without the fossil forgets what was lost. The fossil without the seed forgets what endured. Together they create a continuity deep enough to remind us that the past is not gone entirely. It is breathed still, even now, in quiet persistence. And yet, if memory can flow both in silence and in breath, if some forests vanish to stone while others still cast shade upon our streets, then perhaps neither extinction nor endurance tells the whole story. What about the ghostly traces that lie hidden beneath our feet? Vast forests turned to fuel, burned into flame once more, filling our air today with the echoes of their vanished breath. Beneath our feet lie ghost canopies, not standing green, not bending under wind, but pressed into stone, dissolved into coal, oil, and gas. These are the compressed remnants of forests older than memory, wildernesses that once covered continents in the lush warmth of the Jurassic. What we call fossil fuels are, In truth, the silent archives of vanished canopies, their trunks and leaves and roots buried under pressure, transformed into energy-rich matter by time's weight. They are ghost forests, hidden below fields and cities, waiting in the dark. To think of it this way is unsettling. The light that flickers in our lamps, the hum of our machines, the movement of our world in this present age. So much of it is powered by forests that sang their last songs over 150 million years ago. Coal seams are layered lullabies of ferns and pines. Oil reserves are liquefied memory, once resin and sap, now transformed by heat. Each fossil fuel is a resurrection, an ancient canopy rising again, but not in the form of trees or leaves. Instead, they return as carbon released into the sky, altering the balance of climate just as surely as when they first exhaled oxygen eons before. The irony is haunting. The very forests that once made the Jurassic atmosphere thick with breath now return in another age, but secondhand, rising not as green but as invisible carbon dioxide. Their exhalation, revived by our ignition, is reshaping climates once more. In our burning, the Jurassic connects directly to today, its ghosts drifting into our atmosphere with every spark of flame. It is resurrection, but fragile. It is resurrection, but dangerous. Science shows us this cycle with precision. Layers of coal can be traced through geological strata, clear seams of compressed vegetation laid down in ancient swamps and floodplains. Oil fields align with regions where resinous forests and shallow seas combine to bury organic matter deep beneath sediment. Within these fuels lie isotopic signatures unmistakable in their origin, the chemistry of long-vanished forests preserved in molecular fragments. When we release them, we are not creating new energy. We are unlocking energy stored for millions upon millions of years, unraveling vaults the earth took epochs to seal. Perhaps this is where the ghost feels most vivid. When smoke rises from factories, when exhaust drifts into the air above us, it is not simply modern use. It is the breath of Jurassic forests exhaled again, released long after their trunks turned to dust and their roots sank into memory. It is easy to think these forests are gone entirely, but in a way they have returned inside our own time, altering our skies as they once altered the skies of dinosaurs. The ghost canopy does not remain underground. It lingers above us now. And yet, as always, the message is double. These ghost canopies have given us progress, mobility, warmth, light. They have powered civilizations, carried us across oceans, driven medicine, technology, art. Their memory has fueled not just flame but possibility. But in that gift lies the other truth. Resurgence without restraint becomes poison. Too much resurrection, too much release, and the same atmosphere that nourished giants begins to shift in ways that threaten. The Jurassic forests may be breathing again through us, but the consequences of their ghostly return are ours to bear. There is poetry here if we are willing to see it. Imagine a fern that sprouted in the shadow of a sauropod, buried before its spores could spread, compressed into coal, burned in an engine millions of years later, released as carbon into our sky, taken up by a modern tree, and exhaled again into your very breath. Inhalation of the present, exhalation of the Jurassic. You, in this moment, might carry atoms from those long-dissolved forests within your lungs. The canopy lives, not in form, but in chemistry flowing across deep time. The ghosts are intimate. They are within us. And so the ghost canopies beneath our feet remind us, the past is not sealed. It waits, it lingers, it resurfaces through us. Whether as fossils we study by hand, or as fuels drawn upward by machines, the forests of the Jurassic are not entirely gone. They are absorbed into our air, our lives, our futures. Their resurrection is ongoing, its meaning unsettled, at once miraculous and perilous. And yet, if even ghost canopies can rise again in such unexpected ways, if ancient forests remain entangled in our breath and our choices, then what of memory itself? Does it, too, refuse to vanish? Does it always find new arrangements, new resurrections, somewhere in the labyrinth of time? Forests vanish in matter, but they also vanish in mind. Just as trunks collapse and canopies thin, dreams themselves decay, dissolving into silence, rewritten and rearranged by entropy. The forests of the Jurassic did not only decline in soil and ash, they declined in memory too. Not their own, for trees do not dream, but in the stories and ghosts they leave behind, within the echo of our imagination. Dreams of forests are not permanent. They, too, fade and fragment until what remains is no longer what once was, but something remade by time. Entropy is often thought of as destruction, but it is not. It is transformation. It does not leave forests intact, nor does it leave landscapes unchanged, nor even thoughts or visions whole. But in its slow decomposition lies new possibility. The dream of a forest, held in our minds, sedimented in our culture, whispered in our sleep, begins to fray around the edges. Details are lost. Sounds grow muffled. What remains grows stranger, less precise, unfolding into new metaphors. The canopy of the past becomes a symbol, a shadow, a story. In that rearrangement, entropy does its quiet work. Not erasing, but transmuting memory into another form. Perhaps this is why even our own thoughts of the Jurassic do not remain steady. What we picture shifts as studies change, as fossils are reinterpreted, as new evidence arises. Yesterday's vision of a dark, reptilian past has given way to a new one filled with color, feathers, sound, complexity. Even our understanding of oxygen, rainfall, isotopes, all this, too, reshapes the dream. The memory of the forest is alive not because it stays still, but because entropy insists it must move. Even our dreams are ecosystems, living and evolving within us. But there is more. The planet itself dreams, not through mind, but through processes that act like memory shifting in sleep. Ash layers dissolve into soil, isotopes scatter, ancient atmospheres are rewritten by carbon spills into the modern air. Each forest that falls becomes patterns for other forests to grow. The planet's memory is restless. It reconfigures constantly, folding the past into the present, writing futures out of both decay and renewal. Its dreams, like ours, do not vanish in silence. They mutate, taking strange new shapes. Think of this. The ghost forests we now burn as fossil fuel are not only matter but dream, recast as energy, as sky, as warmth and as instability. The forest dreamed once in green threads across humid continents. Now it dreams again in the haze that settles above our cities, in carbon returning to the sky. The entropy of forest dreams is no distant abstraction. It surrounds us. We breathe it in, touches our weather. It reconfigures the conditions in which our own forests live and die. Memory becomes environment. Dream becomes atmosphere. Entropy ensures continuity by enfolding endings into beginnings unseen. On a more intimate scale, each of us carries fragmentary dreams of vanished forests. We dream them through images of towering giants, through forgotten shadows, through metaphors of silence and green. But even these fade. The more we imagine them, the more they change. They become less about what really was and more about what we need them to be. Symbols of lost grandeur, lessons of patience, warnings of fragility. Entropy dissolves truth but recreates meaning. And in the end, perhaps meaning matters as much as memory. The entropy of forest dreams reminds us that permanence is an illusion. To dream a forest is to accept that it will not remain whole within us. It will change, fragment, recombine. But this is not a failure of memory. It is its essence. Forests themselves lived only by dissolving into soil and air, by breaking their bodies into nourishment for what followed. Our dreams function the same, fading until they seed new imaginations, breaking until they give rise to new visions. Entropy shapes both matter and mind. So, as forests fell, burned, or fossilized, their presence entered other forms. Stone, soil, chemistry, and dream. And those dreams, in time, entered us. Decaying, recomposed, still quietly alive. Entropy does not erase. It redistributes. What was once canopy may now live as metaphor. What was once fern may now live as fuel. What was once silence may now live as story. All forests become dreams. All dreams collapse into possibility. And yet, if even our dreams are subject to entropy, changing, fragmenting, seeding transformations of their own, then what of the forests themselves as symbols of time? Could the last memory of their silence be less about what was and more about how all things become folded into time itself, becoming time as they decay? In the end, the Jurassic forests are less about what they were and more about what they revealed. To think of them as towering conifers, cycads sprawling at their feet, ferns unfolding across damp valleys, is true, but incomplete. For beyond bark and leaf, beyond trunk and canopy, they became something larger, time itself made visible. They were not just forests living within time. They were forests becoming time. Embodied in wood, in stone, in silence, stretched across millions of years until their roots no longer anchored to soil but into eternity itself. Walk with them even only in thought and you feel this truth. The air hangs heavy, a memory translated into breath. Shadows drift across mossy floors, and yet those shadows measure not hours but epochs. Each tree is a clock, its rings ticking slowly, invisibly, circling themselves toward futures they never knowingly reach. Each fallen branch is an hourglass, tipped once, emptied into soil, reappearing as renewal. To walk among them is to glide through time more than space, to see eternity flicker not in the stars above, but in the rising, swaying green shadows at your side. The truth is that no single forest is ever only itself. The Jurassic canopy was built on the silence of Triassic life, and it crumbled into the fuel and stone of the Cretaceous that followed. What we call one forest is really an arrangement of cycles, strung together, interlaced, repeating in ways we rarely perceive. And so when we call the Jurassic forests ancient, we misplace their meaning slightly. They are not merely lost in antiquity. They are present still, folded into rivers, into the chemistry of air, into the soils and lineages that remain. They are time embodied, endlessly broken and endlessly recomposed. Science gives us fragments of this eternity. A footprint, reminding us of a specific motion on one forgotten afternoon. An isotope ratio whispering of rainfall in a climate that has no witness. Amber beads glowing with insects who never escaped. A petrified trunk, rings intact, frozen into quartz but still carrying the design of patience itself. Each fragment is not only evidence, but a gesture toward something greater. Not a tree, not a footprint, but time itself condensed into form. When we trace them with fingers or eyes, what we touch is the edge of eternity filtered into matter. And yet, time here does not feel abstract. Feels breathing, immediate. To imagine Jurassic forests is to imagine time in green, always expanding upward, always falling back down, always recycling, patient and endless. They remind us that eternity is not stillness, but movement, a ceaseless circulation of growth and decay, silence and renewal. The forest lives forever not because its trees endure unchanged, but because it teaches continuity, because every loss is also creation, because time transforms endings into beginnings. Walking through such a forest, even in imagination, is walking through time's green labyrinth. Each path leads not to resolution, but to recognition that eternity is not far away. It is here, hidden in soil's dark patience, in the fossil's quiet shine, in each breath that still carries atoms once exhaled by vanished leaves. The forests reveal that eternity is not unreachable. It is woven into every layered shadow and lingering silence we step upon. Perhaps this is the great gift of the Jurassic forest. It transcends the difference between memory and presence. It reminds us that time is not only behind us, but inside us, flowing through bone and breath, through mind and soil. The forests existed in their age, but in their transformation into fuel, into stone, into air, they exist still. We walk through their absence and yet carry their presence. To know them is to glimpse the scale of time itself, to understand in fragments what eternity does in full. There is a stillness in this realization, and maybe also a humility. For we, too, are forests in passing, our own lives entwined in cycles that will fade into soil, into silence, into whispers for futures beyond us. The trees taught this rhythm long before we learned to name it. They still teach it now if we listen gently enough. And so, when we imagine those Jurassic shadows, tall conifers swaying against humid skies, cycads bending low, spores drifting upward like forgotten prayers, we are not merely picturing the distant past. We are standing in eternity disguised as green. The forest was not only habitat. It was time itself breathing slowly before us. And yet, if the forests of deep time revealed eternity in their shadows, what do today's forests reveal to us now? Could it be that they, too, are not just landscapes, but living reminders that we have always been walking inside time's cathedral, and will always be?